Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Making the Argument. Today, we're actually going to be going over some really interesting studies and polls which show that the rift that is building between men and women, especially young men and women, has probably gotten more intense recently over the last couple of decades than you could be able to argue perhaps ever before in human history. And today, what we're going to be talking about is how bad is it really? Like, how bad is it really? Not just the hyperbolic things that you see on the news sometimes, but actually looking through this. How bad is it? Why? Why is it this bad? And believe me, some of the answers are probably not what you're thinking. And then finally, we're going to ask what is, I think, one of the most important questions, and that is, what, if anything, can we do about it? And we're going to have some specifics to go over there as well. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Good Ranchers.
If you're watching this episode for the first time after watching last Thursday's episode on SCOTUS and the border, keep in mind that we had a great discussion on that topic in our community chat, which you can join by clicking the link below in the description. Let's get right into it.
All right. As always, I'm your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates, but other than that, a reasonably good guy. With us, as always, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our resident historian and political prognosticator, Master Hines.
Hello.
And then, of course, our producer of producers, Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
That's right, Nick. Let's go.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump right into this. All right, here we go. So there is a chart that has been making the rounds. Actually, there's a few of them that have been making the rounds for a while now that is demonstrating just how stark the difference is between young men and young women with respect to their political ideologies. And the first, one of the charts that started making the round was focused specifically on high school boys and girls, and we're going to get to that one. But there's been several more since then. And what we're going to talk about today is just, again, how stark that change has gotten, how stark that difference has gotten, who it's affecting, right? And why is this all happening, right? And why specifically now? Why is it? Because it's not as if we're necessarily engaged in some sort of like massive world war or some sort of massive existential threat. I mean, obviously, when you look at human history, there's been plenty of times when things have been considerably worse for men and women. So why is it now, at a time of historically relative peace and prosperity, that we're starting to see these huge changes? So let's go ahead and look at this first chart, and this has to go with political identities of 12th grade girls. Really, 12th grade girls. And so here's what you're going to see. I mean, you see this massive leap. Now, it's not unusual for young women to typically identify as being more left of center, especially compared to boys. But when you look at this chart, what you end up seeing is that there was a dip, and then it came a little bit closer together from the girls that identified as being more liberal versus the girls that identified as being more conservative. And then you had your times, a little bit up, a little bit down. But if you look at it where it's at, like right now, it's the biggest difference that it's been for a long time, and it is just incredible the amount of young girls that are identifying as liberal or even like super liberal. And here's the other thing to keep in mind. Identifying as liberal in 1985 is not quite the same as identifying liberal today, right? In 1985, liberal was, I think the welfare state is a good idea, and we probably should have a higher marginal tax rate for rich people, and I'm kind of scared of guns, and abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Liberal today is a completely different story. So just keep in mind that as the Overton window has shifted drastically to the left on so many issues, where safe, legal, rare is now anytime, any place, for any reason, and at taxpayer expense. And I want background checks is now I want to confiscate your guns, right? And it was, men can sometimes be a pain, which is men are now the source of all evil within the world, right? This is the shift that's happened, and young girls especially are totally buying it, right? They are totally going with it. Let's pull up the next chart to kind of show what's going on the other side, and this is with the boys, right? So just like the girls have become more liberal than ever, the boys are becoming more conservative than ever. And as you can see, there's actually been more crossover with respect to boys and their ideologies. There's been times where boys tended to identify as being a little bit more left of center, or a little bit more moderate or center, but not right now. Not right now. The number of boys identifying as being as liberal is like an all-time low on this chart, and the number of boys identifying as conservative not at an all-time high, but pretty close to it. So once again, what does conservatism mean now versus 1985? And I would argue that in many respects, conservatism in 1985 generally was, I mean, there was pro-life. You had the moral majority, right, in the 1980s. People generally believe, like conservatives generally advocated for, strong traditional families, strong traditional morals. I don't think you can honestly claim that the right in the United States has like just totally shifted or gone off key or become something that nobody even recognizes anymore or wouldn't recognize back in the 80s. If you took a typical conservative Republican in the 80s and put him up with a typical conservative right now, the conservative right now would probably actually be a little bit more to the left on a number of issues and probably right about where they were before, except for maybe on some where they're just so mad about it that they're shifting over. But on the left, it's like I don't think the two would even recognize each other. And go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say that's absolutely true. I don't know if you guys have seen some of the old Joe Biden videos and even Barack Obama videos where they're flatly condemning, gay marriage or where they're talking about even abortion. They were way more moderate on abortion. And so their positions from the 90s and early 2000s are now considered extremist right wing in comparison to where they are now. And you can even just see the shift in the individual people. It's not like, oh, this generation shifted. You actually watch Obama shift. You watch Joe Biden shift. And so they're all, the Overton window has completely shifted, and you can see the same person saying the exact opposite thing 15, 20 years apart.
I encourage you to go and look at, after this podcast, if you want to like really blow your mind, go and look up 1980s Joe Biden ads when he was running for U.S. Senate. And look at some of the stuff that he says where he's like, we need to secure the border and we need a balanced budget amendment.
Exactly.
So
if you go back to the, if you go way back in history to the way back, right? 2019. There's an interview between Dennis Prager and he's on Bill Maher's show. And Dennis Prager mentions this thing about, well, now they're saying men can menstruate. And all the leftists on the panel, to include Bill Maher, just start laughing at him. And Bill Maher's like, what are you even talking about? And Dennis Prager's like, are you kidding me? You've never heard this before? I mean, it's your guys. The people on the left are claiming that men can menstruate. Go Google it. Go look it up. And seriously, everyone on the left is sitting, they're mocking Dennis Prager for saying this, like, how ridiculous, how absurd, how stupid. And it's, yes, because that's been the normal thing. We've talked about this before, right? Whenever we notice something is happening, they say it isn't happening. Then they say it isn't happening, but if it is happening, it's a good thing. Then they ask you, why do you care so much about what's happening? And then they claim that the real problem is you noticing that it's happening, right? So, and again, for anybody that wants to tell us that we're not being intellectually honest here, I can't think of a better representation of this than Dennis Prager on the Bill Maher show in 2019, because it was that long ago where mainstream liberalism thought this idea that men can menstruate was stupid, was ridiculous. Nobody thinks this. Well, here we are.
Nick, to that point, and the last thing that I want to harp on with these two graphs here between, the shifting ideologies of 12th grade men and women is when you look at the chart for women, right? Because the theme for today's episode is the growing ideological divide between men and women, especially young men and women. When you look at young women, you actually see from 1975, and I'm trying to explain it for our audio listeners as well that can't physically see the chart here. When you look from like 1975 to 2015, really 2014, what you see is actually it's fairly consistent for young women. Yes, they are more liberal than they are conservative, but they're usually hovering in this 20% range, identifying as being liberal. That's like 30, 40 years, right? And then something happened a decade ago, starting in 2014, really. Something happened about a decade ago where the number of 12th grade girls that started identifying as liberal went from sub 20% to exploding to all-time highs of over 30%. And this all happened within 10 years, from 2014 to today. And then when you look at the same chart for young boys, 12th grade men, well, I guess they're men, right? If they're 18. When you look at 12th grade men or boys, what you see is the same thing almost in reverse, where it's from 1975 to, again, about 2015 or so. the number of boys in 12th grade that identify as conservative and liberal are usually actually about equal. So they're more to the right of women, but it's still consistent, right? It's almost the same number. It's hovering in this 15 to 25% or 15 to 23% range for both conservative and liberal from 1975 to about 2015. And what you've seen since 2015 is a gradual and then an accelerated move towards the right among 12th grade boys.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that part of the reason this could be is that the boys, the more liberal they get to a certain point and then they transition to girl and then they're on the girl chart and that's why they've gone so far left and the boys, the only ones left on the boys' side are more conservative?
I have a feeling that we're going to cover that topic in a lot more detail later in this podcast. Nick, I know that you wanted to move on to the thing that really kind of like took Twitter by storm. Sorry, I keep calling it Twitter. X. Forgive me, Elon. There was this chart and this Financial Times article, which I recommend people take a look at. But there was this thread on Twitter by the guy who wrote this that just absolutely exploded on Twitter. And he wrote this literally like 3 days ago. And it's gotten almost 25 million views since then. And we don't need to go through like the entire thing because it's actually quite a long thread. But he explains here that, he writes that an ideological divide is emerging between young men and women in many countries around the world. And so it's not just the United States. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on to say, I think one of the most important social trends is unfolding today, and it provides an answer to several puzzles. And in this chart that he uses at the very beginning of this thread, he shows multiple countries here. He shows South Korea, the United States, Germany, and the UK. And it's self-described political ideology of percent liberal minus percent conservative, broken down by gender, men and women. I'm sorry for the people that don't believe in gender binaries. They're going to be disappointed by this study. But it's broken down by gender among 18 to 29-year-olds. And so to stress that, we're talking about Zoomers and young millennials, basically everybody from like Nick and Tina's kids up to Hamilton and myself. And it goes back from 2005 all the way to the present day, again, among these four countries. And with the exception of the UK, and even in the UK, you see a growing divide, but they're both moving in the left-wing direction. But with the exception of the UK, you see this like just stark emerging chasm between young men and women that previously, 15, 20 years ago. In South Korea, it goes back to 2005. In the US and Germany, it goes back to 1990 and 1980. So
I mean, the thing to, and for, again, people that can't see the chart, the thing to look at this is that when you look at South Korea, there's about it looks like about a 50-point difference between men and women on how they identify, whether liberal or conservative. When you look at the United States, it looks like it's about a 40-point difference. Germany's a little over 20 point. The UK is a little over 20 points. So, I mean, you really, even if men overall in South Korea, men overall are just going hardcore conservative. Young men are going hardcore conservative. In the US, they're starting to trend toward that direction to become to pass over like majority conservative. In Germany, men are majority conservative. And then the UK, men are the most liberal, but there's still like a 20-point difference between men and women on how they politically identify. It's amazing how when we say how they identify, we have to preface it by saying politically identify.
Politically,
and
yeah, but you even just look at look at the UK. You've got men up between 20 and 30%, whereas everywhere else, men are either on the conservative side. 20 to 30%. Okay, so UK 20 to 30% liberal. And then everywhere else, the men are either conservative or really close to the zero mark. So why in the world are UK men so left-leaning?
They had, they were all emasculated, I guess. I was just in the UK a month ago.
Don't offend our UK listeners.
Yeah, no, Jonam is pretty based. I got to meet him in person. Jonam actually, Nick interviewed him on this podcast not that long ago. So he's been a long-time listener of the podcast. I actually got to meet him in person.
My mom loved that episode.
Yeah, it was a great episode. Yeah. He's pretty based, but like when you go to the UK, and I was there in person, let me tell you, the left-wing indoctrination is everywhere in the United Kingdom. They have street corners painted in like trans pride flags on the street. Like it is everywhere, the indoctrination. It's government sanctioned. It's become a state sanctioned religion, basically. So I'm not terribly surprised by it. I mean, maybe that's a whole episode for a different podcast for a different day. But what I find so fascinating about this, and I really I think this is going to lead to the broader discussion for this segment of the podcast, is it wasn't always this way. When you look at the past for each of these 4 countries, what you see is that it wasn't that long ago that there was a minor ideological divide among 18 to 29-year-old men and women. For example, in South Korea in 2005, there was no gap at all. They were both moderately to the left by about 10 points more liberal than conservative. And even as late as about 2015 or 16, the gap was relatively minor, and both men and women had started moving massively to the left. They had gone from being about 10 points to the left to about 20 points to the left. In the United States, back in the 1990s and in the 1980s, the men were more liberal than the women. And then as late as 2010, they had both been moving to the left, but the gap was still relatively small. And then when you look at Germany in 1980, again, men were more liberal than women, but the gap was almost non-existent. And what you see is that as late as 2010 in Germany, both of them had been getting more conservative, but the gap was relatively small. And then in the United Kingdom, as late as 2010, there was no gap at all. And so what you've seen in almost every single one of these countries is literally in the last 10 years or so, a gap has gone from being either non-existent or barely existent to exponential chasm growing between men and women.
Do you think there's an issue driving it? Like, what's the main issue driving it? If I were to look at it and think what I think the main issue driving it is gender ideology. But what's frustrating to me is you see all these women are getting more and more left, which makes them totally love all the trans stuff. But then it's destroying women's stuff. So I have a feeling, once the damage is done, women will come back.
And we definitely want to get into why is this happening. But if we look at, I don't think we're totally done at just looking at what exactly is happening.
Yeah.
Because when you look at these gaps, you can see that it's not just the United States. And keep in mind, the charts that we're showing you right now, this is not men across the board. These are young men. Like every chart we've shown you, nothing's over than I think 29 years old. So these are all people in their 20s and teens, basically. That's what we're looking at here. Because typically that age group tends to be more left of center, tends to be more liberal anyways, right? It's the famous Churchill quote of, if you're young and not a liberal, you have no heart. If you're old and not a conservative, you have no brain. But what we're starting to, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but what we're starting to see is like with young people, especially young men, again, they're breaking hard right and women are breaking hard left. And that is just not a phenomenon that we've really seen in other places as we've started to like track this data. And so I think we have this. I think there's one other chart that we were going to show. Part of it too is what we're also seeing is, and this is kind of transitioning into why is this happening? But we also noticed a massive gap between single women and married women. So single men, married men, one of the things that you can kind of identify either way is that marriage tends to make for a more conservative voter.
Do we have a chart for that?
I think we do.
We do, but before we get into that, because Nick said that we wanted to dive just a little bit deeper into what exactly is happening. This thread actually has a couple points in here that I really want to get across for our listeners. Again, I'm not going to read the entire thread. I highly recommend that you go read it. This guy, John Byrne Murdoch, is the one who wrote it. And his Twitter handle is jbyrnemurdoch, if you want to look it up yourself after, especially if you're an audio listener. But he goes on to say in here, again, there's a few tweets in here that I think are really eye-opening. And he goes on to say that we're often told Gen Z is hyper-progressive, but other surveys suggest that they're surprisingly conservative. And so what he did is that when he broke it down by sex, he found that there was this gap that many people hadn't previously discovered before. And it was explaining why you're seeing some of these contradictory polls where it's like one poll shows that like, oh, Gen Z is going to vote for Donald Trump. And then another poll shows that, Gen Z is overwhelmingly progressive left wing. And he was trying to figure out why this is the case. And he found that there's actually two generations, not one. one are men and one are women, and they're just in completely different ideological camps. And as Nick was saying, it's not just in the United States. It's a global phenomenon. The most extreme example of this is actually South Korea, where the men have taken a very hard right turn very fast.
I think what's
go ahead.
One of the things I think is interesting as we look at this, and I wish we could see this in other categories. All the stuff that we have right now. This would be an interesting question. Unfortunately, I didn't think of it until right now. It is the countries that this are taking place, and then compare that with respect to not just left and right, not just liberal and conservative, but like the woke ideology, the intersectional politics, the critical theory, the postmodernism, all of those things to correspond with it is going to be a really interesting question to see if the gap exists the same way in other countries that it does in those countries which have kind of like fully embraced this. And the reason why I kind of bring that up is if you look at South Korea is what you would probably call much more of like at a fundamental level. Socially, South Korea is a much more conservative place than the United States. So when they started to adopt a lot of kind of like the woke ideology and whatnot, it was relatively quickly and over a short time period. I would argue that, and again, I don't claim to have perfect knowledge of South Korean history, but from what I do know of it, they didn't have their 60s sexual revolution like the United States did. I can't point to a particular time in South Korean history where I would say, oh yeah, that was it. That was the part where you started to see this major drastic shift in a particular direction or whatnot. There were certainly more gradual things. But when you look at, we look at the United States and we're saying like, man, this woke stuff happened just kind of like overnight. And as we unpack it a little bit more, we realize that, okay, well, no, there was several things that kind of moved in that laid the groundwork that got us to where we're at, even though it's been relatively quick. I would argue that's been even more of a starker difference in a place like South Korea.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Nick, if you remember when we did our podcast on why some cities are becoming more conservative and why suburbs are becoming more left-wing, the most prominent example of that was South Korea, right? Where downtown Seoul, where a lot of young men are working, they're starting their careers, shifted massively to the right in the last decade or so. And the suburbs around Seoul, which are very suburban and very wealthy, have shifted massively to the left. And then when you broke it down by demographics, age and gender and stuff like that, the last presidential election, for example, one of the most loyal demographic groups for the Conservative Party, small c, not big C, one of the most loyal demographic groups for the Conservative Party in South Korea were 18 to 29-year-old men. Yeah. Followed, they were second behind their grandmothers, right? The 65 plus, women, which are apparently super based in South Korea. And so like, and that's at the same time that the conservatives in South Korea are getting absolutely blown out of the water among 18 to 29-year-old women. They're losing them as much as they're winning young men by. And we did a whole podcast on that where we weren't trying to give somebody a crash course history on South Korean politics, but we were using that as an example where we were basically trying to argue that what has happened in South Korea is they're ahead of the curve. It's a harbinger of what's to happen. And if you look at this chart here, right, when you look at these four countries that the Financial Times looked at, it's hard to argue otherwise. When you look at the trend line with South Korea versus, for example, the trend line with the United States, it looks to me like South Korea is simply 5 to 10 years ahead of where we are. Like Tina brought up, for example, that young men have been getting more conservative since the 1990s and very much more conservative since 2010. And meanwhile, young women have just absolutely flown off the rails. I mean, just the young women are becoming liberal, left-wing way faster than young men are becoming conservative. But you saw the same thing in South Korea before, right? When you look at like the 2005 to 2015 era, you saw that young women in South Korea became liberal way faster than young men were becoming conservative. And then it reversed. And then men decided, basically this massive backlash took place. And so I think that the reason that it's important to look at some of these other countries is because the United States does not exist in a bubble. And ideas and ideologies don't respect borders. They can spread across continents. They can spread across generations. And to Nick's point,
especially with how connected we all are nowadays. I mean, our audience alone is a global audience. And so, you just look at how much more reach everything has, and you've got the era of TikTok, and before that it was Vine videos, and social media has people so connected that, I mean, like even in countries where in some countries they kind of lock down what can and can't be seen on social media. Maybe that has a little bit to do with why some stay more liberal than others, because
Like
they're the ones that like to lock it down. So
I totally agree. To give you an idea of just how big of a change some of this is, like here's a poll, for example. Actually, let me pull up the corrected one, because he pointed out that there's actually a typo here, and I don't want to confuse our audience. This is the correct one. Share who disagree with the statement that, quote, what women really want is a family and children, although they like to work too, broken down by age and sex. And what you see is that, like, you know, boomers and Gen X and stuff like that, large numbers of them would not disagree with that statement. And what you see with young women, though, is that it's like 45% of them disagree with that. But then you look at their parents and grandparents, and it's like under 30%. And with their grandparents, it's under 20%. With 65 plus, it's under 10%. And you don't see nearly as much of a divide among young men with that. And it's not just with this. For example, there's one more country here that I wanted to bring up very briefly, because I know that there's so much more that we need to unpack here. Here was the exit polling for Poland's elections that they held just a month ago. This is in December 2023. And what you find is this is among 18 to 21-year-olds. This isn't even up to 29. This is the youngest voters in Poland. These are people that just graduated high school, right? This is their first election, basically. And what you see is, broken down by party, what you see is that among 18 to 21-year-old men, this is a multi-party system. You got to remember that. There's like 5 or 6 parties that, had a shot of winning a significant number of seats in the Polish parliament, right? So it's not a binary choice. You get to pick among many different ideologies and many different parties. And yet in a multi-party system, almost half of 18 to 21-year-old men voted for what's labeled the far-right Confederation Party. They're the most right-wing party. Now, what I find interesting is that they're labeled far-right, but when you actually look at their platform, they're actually quite libertarian. They're far-right insofar as they're Polish nationalists. They want an end to, like, the European Union. They don't want unlimited mass immigration. They demand assimilation into their culture if you're going to move there.
So you're saying they were pretty overwhelming, but the women were opposite.
Almost half. In a multi-party system, almost half of 18 to 21-year-old men voted for the most right-wing party that won seats in the Polish parliament. Only 16% of young women in the same age group voted for them. So you're talking about a 30-point gap between young men and women on who voted for the most right-wing party in Poland. And by the way, they're not just right culturally. Like, they're also they're very libertarian. Like, they want to get rid of the income tax. They're
very what we call, like, fiscally conservative / libertarian.
Yeah,
very free market
and very
oriented.
anti-woke is why they're called far right.
Well, and that's why you see no matter where you're going. I mean, we've talked about the United States. We've talked about Europe. We've also seen similar trends in South America. We're seeing these trends happen in places like Korea. I wouldn't be surprised if we pulled up charts in other places within Asia. We'd see something similar. And it just goes to show that, like, when it comes to men and women, there seems to be, at least politically, very, very little that they actually agree on for young men and women. Which is why Good Ranchers would probably be just a great thing for them to be able to come together, break bread, have some of the best quality American farm-raised beef, poultry, pork, wild caught seafood, right? If they could just sit down at the table together and share some of some proteins, right? If you could just do that, this would probably solve so many of our problems right now. And that's what Good Ranchers does. It solves problems between people that would otherwise disagree on everything, but can all agree that a good meal just makes you think better. And that's probably what's going on here, that in many cases, we just have people that, they're hungry. They're hungry right now, and they're not thinking straight. And so Good Ranchers has a great deal for you. If you go to goodranchers.com, you use promo code Nick. Not only you sign up, this is in January, and January's almost done, right? So, like, we need, like, lickety split, like, get on it. Because if you do this in January, you sign up for one of the subscriptions, you're going to get free chicken with your order, right, for like the whole year. That's like $180 a chicken that they're just going to give you because they're great people. And because, again, they don't want you to be hangry. Hangry people make bad political decisions along with bad decisions on everything else. So go to goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick. You're going to get some free shipping. You get some, like all kinds of other stuff. They got some great swag over there too. If you also want to wear some Good Ranchers swag, I got some Good Ranchers swag on today. All right, goodranchers.com, promo code Nick. Go sign up for that deal. Promise you, you're not going to be disappointed. All right. Let's go ahead and transition over into the why is this happening? Because it's one thing to point out that, hey, it's happening all over the place, not just in the United States. And it's kind of manifesting in places that are not, not a one-for-one exchange, right? A lot of times when people look at Western Europe and they look at the United States or they look at maybe the UK and the US, they see a lot of crossover. Because there's a lot of shared culture, a lot of, to some respect, shared history and things like that. But when you start getting into other areas that, this isn't, this isn't necessarily the same culture. There's different traditions, right? And you're seeing the same. So what are some of the things that we see? Now, we commented briefly about, the difference between how married people vote and how unmarried people vote. And that difference is especially stark when it comes to women. So you will typically see, younger men, younger unmarried men also tend to vote more, left wing. But when a man gets married, man has kids, they tend to vote more conservatively. All right. Now, again, you could argue that overall they vote conservatively anyways. In fact, all of the polls that we've been looking at are showing that young men, and we're presumably a lot of these are young unmarried men because we're talking about 18 to 21-year-olds in a lot of this, they're unmarried and they're becoming more and more conservative. Women, on the other hand, and we've got this chart here which really exemplifies this, and like this one just really shows right now. So married women vote about 56% conservative or right of center, right? Married women, about 42% of married women, right? So there's always a portion in there that, kind of maybe votes third party or is not very involved or whatever it is. But overall, what you see is that a majority of married women tend to vote more right of center over time. That doesn't mean every single election cycle, doesn't mean every single candidate. Unmarried women, on the other hand, 62% of the time, they vote Democrat, or they vote left or left of center, right? Compared with 35% that vote right of center. So that's a massive.
Why do you think that is?
Massive change.
Do you think it's because men just bring the hammer down on their wives, like, you will vote this way?
Well, that's what the left likes to claim.
The left loves to pretend that women who are on the right and are married, it's because our husbands force us.
I think what's interesting about that, one, I think that's a very convenient claim for the left. But the other thing that I think we need to consider here when we look at this is not just this statistic in and of itself. We have to look at how other things have affected this. But I mean, to answer that question, I think what ends up happening is when you get married, and especially when you get married and for people that expect to have children and things like that, the things that tend to motivate your political ideology, your political leanings prior to marriage are usually focused around things like, if you're religious or not. Or it might focus around the sort of industry or profession that you have. Or it might focus on whether or not, you spend a lot of time in college, right? And especially if you're studying the humanities, right? All of these things are impacting the way that you look in the world. And some of it might be, driven by idealism, like what you think should be happening. Some of it might be driven by what you perceive to be, injustice within the world. But a lot of it tends to be either focused on your own personal issues or values, combined with your own personal ambitions, right? The moment you get married, you've got another person that you're worried about. The moment you have kids, you've got, little people that you are desperately responsible. You are certainly responsible for and who completely depend upon you. And so the theory has been, and I think there's some truth to this, although I think some of it's a little bit, overly convenient for the people on the left to try to explain it, is that you start to be more conservative with respect to the dangers in the world. You start to be a little bit more keen to the threats. And so the idealism that might have said, well, why can't we just change the world? Why can't we just do this? Why can't we just do that? Like, the fence is up, it's in the way, it's blocking our freedom. You get married and all of a sudden you're concerned about other people and you start saying, well, okay, wait a second. Why are these, before we start tearing down fences, why were they put up, right? Maybe they need to be torn down, but maybe not. Like, why? You start to be a little bit more concerned. All of a sudden, the fun-loving rebel that you were before, when it was only you and the consequences didn't affect a lot of people, you were more willing to accept a lot of risks. You start to get married and you tend to become more risk averse because, again, the consequences extend beyond you. Now, that's where you'll get some people saying, well, yeah, that's why we need, young people to be creative and to push boundaries. And yeah, that there can definitely be a value to that. I would argue, as long as you have certain guardrails in place, right? You want people to push limits in a positive direction. You want them to challenge status quos in a positive direction, but you also need other people that might be a little bit older, or might be a little bit wiser, to explain why certain barriers were put in place in the first place, so that when you do push them, you push them in a positive direction instead of regressing into something horrible. And I think what we've seen a lot of right now is an ideological push in a particular direction. And the first thing that I want to bring up here is I want to look at this whole concept of, again, why is there, the specific question we're trying to answer is, why is there such a massive split between young men and young women? And this is part where I want to go into the various phases of feminism. So we have an article here. I got this one out of the History Channel. They did one that I thought was fairly decent. But if you look at the reason that they give here, and I think this is something that a lot of times people look at feminism as just kind of one monolithic movement. When in reality, there's been different phases to feminism. And you can certainly have some connecting features all the way back to its initial start to the modern day. But I would argue that in many respects, there's been something of at least more of an overt departure. So when you look at the first wave of feminism, and we can kind of scroll to the portion in the article that talks about the first wave, that's from like the mid 19th century. Scroll up a little bit, Christian, just so kind of the mid 19th century to 1920 is the way the History Channel is talking about that. And what you generally see with that is the suffragette movement. Now, it's important to understand that not everybody in the first wave of feminism was just worried about the vote. There was the vote. A lot of time in the United States, there was also a big push toward prohibition as well. And some of this, I mean, obviously, I look at a lot of elements with the first wave of feminism, and I'm very sympathetic to it from the sense that women wanted the right to vote. They wanted to feel like they were full participants within the political process. Why should they be subject to the laws if they don't actually get to vote on them? Now that the argument is a little bit more complex than it's often made out to be right now. And the argument used to be, the reason why men got the vote first is because men could get drafted. Men had to go off to war, and women didn't have the same responsibility for the security of the state. And so that's why it was delayed. Now, I'm not telling you that that's justifiable reasoning. I don't personally think it is in and of itself. But I think it's important for everyone to understand that this wasn't as simple as a lot of the movies you see now, where it's just, men didn't want women to vote because it was too much for their fragile sensibilities, right? That was not, I'm sure a lot of men felt that way, but that wasn't the totality of the argument. Again, I don't think that was a good argument. I don't think it was sufficient, and which is why I'm very sympathetic with what we would call the suffragette movement and seeking out equal protection before the law, right? So I think there's a lot within that most people now just kind of take for granted. Well, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Women should have equal protection before the law. They should be equal participants with respect to the voting process. That's something that I would say the vast majority of people still believe right now and kind of take for granted. And that's why they kind of ended in the 1920s, is because when you see the suffrage movements and specifically within the United States, you see a suffrage movement once women's the right for women to vote was enshrined in the Constitution with the passing of the 19th Amendment. That kind of signified the end of the suffrage movement. That doesn't mean that there wasn't still things they wanted to accomplish. Second wave feminism is generally associated with the 1963 and the 1980s. And I would say I think at that point you have a massive departure between the suffragettes and feminism on that second wave. And you can even see the big time gap in between, right? Like, and again, some people may disagree with the History Channel is breaking this down, but History Channel says first movement ends in 1920, second wave builds up in 1963. Well, okay, what was happening in the 1960s within the United States and a lot of other places around the world, especially within the West?
Liberation.
It's sexual liberation, sexual revolution.
Long march through the institutions.
Yeah, the other thing that I think
But the
you
only
have
way to
to
liberate women sexually was to liberate them from motherhood. And so that's why that push was so hard.
well,
on
I
that.
think that when you look at some of the main people, and you can what is it, Betty Friedan, with the feminine mystique, and then you had I always butcher her last name, but was it Simone Beauvoir? She was the girlfriend of Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist. And then, of course, Gloria Steinman was another big player within the second wave feminism. But it really was this idea that, okay, yeah, we got the right to vote. However, society itself, the social norms within society are still rooted in this idea of traditional gender roles. And so, okay, fine, maybe women can vote, but we still don't have equal access within, professional circles. We're still not treated as equals. And again, some people, you might be able to look at that and say, okay, I have a certain degree of sympathy with this idea that there were certain things that were off limit to women, or maybe there were glass ceilings, that there was no legal prohibition, but there's still, problems with respect to women capable women being able to achieve things based off of their merit.
Well,
But on the other side of that, I think it's also, and this is one thing to understand, not just about feminism in general, especially modern feminism. This is something to understand about Marxism too, and we're going to get into that, is that oftentimes what will happen is you'll see these movements which end up being inherently left-wing in their ideology, right? The reason why we call them Marxist or neo-Marxist is not because we're red scaring everyone. It's because when you start to look at Karl Marx and you start to look at his explanation of the world, because it wasn't just an economic theory or a political theory, it really was a greater, social theory about humanity. James Lindsay goes so far as to call it a religious or a religion. I don't know if I would personally go that far, but what it really comes down to is those things would connect themselves to what you could look at, what a reasonable person could look at as a legitimate grievance. And so with feminism in the 60s, you didn't just have, hey, we don't think we should be barred from participating in certain professional activities. It was, we don't think we should be barred from, participating in these activities. And, we want birth control, we want abortion on demand because a woman's cycle or a woman's ability to get pregnant stifles her professional ambitions. And we want to be able to have sex the same way men do, which is to treat it frivolously and to have multiple partners. And we don't want to be tied down by marriage because marriage inevitably leads to getting pregnant. And then now I can't fulfill my professional ambitions because I'm stuck at home with the kids.
There's another aspect of this, though, that I think you're missing a little bit.
Well, I haven't got to everything I'm saying, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that I think one of the reasons why this was sold so well to women is not just because of sexual liberation, but also because there was a time when, in order for a woman to be sort of protected or to be taken care of or have some kind of a comfortable future, she had to pair up. And if she didn't pair up with somebody and get married, there was not a whole lot of options for her. And so, and I think you also look at during that time as well. And I think that 23andMe and Ancestry.com has really, really exposed a lot of this with, there were plenty of very married men going around making babies with a lot of other people. And a lot of those chickens are coming home to roost now that we can check DNA and everything. But you had women who felt trapped in marriages and I'm not saying this is overwhelmingly the norm or anything like that, but you did have situations. I mean, and one of the reasons why prohibition was really, what did they call that? I can't remember.
The temperance movement.
The temperance
movement. Yeah.
It was born of women who, they didn't want to get hit by their husbands anymore when they came home drunk. They didn't want to have to forgive another infidelity situation because he was drunk, and so a lot of this I think was tied into women generally were not happy with the way they were being treated. And sometimes when you have a legitimate grievance, it's a nice doorway to wedge something a lot bigger into it that kind of exploits that weakness. And I think that feminism just got in there, because I think, there were reasons why a logical woman, anybody could look at this and go, oh yeah, it makes sense that a woman should be able to, have a job and vote and not have to be married, but and I think it was really, really ingrained in us. I mean, even when I was a kid, it was ingrained that like you better have some kind of a plan, some kind of backup plan. Because you never know, you can't just depend on your husband. He might just leave you, like he could die or he could leave you. And then where will you be?
I think this is the point too, where again, men have to take some responsibility for this. When we look back in history, because
I think they have.
Well, no, I think that's true. I think a lot. I certainly think conservative men or men on the right tend to believe that yes, there's when you look at something like the temperance movement, this didn't just show up one day because women were mad that guys were drinking a little bit too much with the guys. There was significant family, social, economic, professional consequences for just like rampant drunkenness and alcoholism. There was a lot of problems with other things with men not fulfilling certain responsibilities. And again, you can perfectly understand why, anybody would not want people people want to get married because they want to get married, not because they feel they absolutely have to, because it's an economic or just a safety imperative. And Tina's point about the fact that it used to be that you had to get married off for economic reasons and because you weren't safe unless you had a man to protect you. And so I think it's perfectly legitimate for people to say like, yeah, hey, I don't want to live under those circumstances. Doesn't mean I want to throw off marriage altogether. It doesn't mean I want to do these other things, but I don't want that. And the problem is that when the response to change or when the response to a legitimate grievance is, well, it's not as bad as you're saying it is, or, you should just be happy with your lot, or it used to be much worse, or we gave you the vote, why are you still complaining, right? Like if that's the response, instead of saying, okay, what part of this is legitimate grievance and let's have an honest conversation about how we address it, then what you do is you open up the opportunity for a different movement to be able to come in and hijack your movement for its own purposes.
Because they need it to keep going. They need it to keep going because they're making money off of it and they're pushing an ideology.
Well, I think what you saw in and it's not just the 1960s, but let's back up just a little bit, right? So you had first wave feminism kind of ending in the 1920s, roughly. Okay, so the early part of the 20th century is when the progressive era really started moving. So you had government expanding, you had a lot of people. You had Woodrow Wilson with the idea of kind of more the technocrat state, that society should be managed by wise people like him with Yale degrees from Yale and experts in their field. And then you really saw this start to expand too under Hoover and then again under FDR. Now, what was interesting is that if you go back, if you start to look at some of these movements, keep in mind that certain movements like fascism were not considered. Were considered more in line with progressives in the United States. I mean, Mussolini said that basically the New Deal was very similar to what he was doing in fascist Italy early on. And that's why you actually saw a lot of crossover between, people like Hugh Johnson that was running the National Recovery Act for the FDR administration, handing out the corporate state, which was essentially an Italian fascist track. At the same time, you had people like Antonio Gramsci, who was in Italy. Now, his book didn't get translated in English, I think, until the 1970s in the United States. But you had people all over Europe and the Frankfurt School basically looking at Gramsci's idea of the march through the institutions and trying to set up essentially a counterculture to capitalist culture. So these ideas with that really started to get going. Now, understand, fascism completely, was kind of dead as an ideology in the United States and other Western countries because of World War II. That was not the same for communism.
Communism succeeded because of World War II.
Yeah, so communism actually became, and the Soviet Union, you can read all about this with Yuri Bezmenov and what they call active measures and things like that. But just like the United States had things like Air America and the Marshall Plan and the Berlin Airlift, where we were trying to influence people in the direction toward what we would probably refer to as, liberal democracy or free market economics or whatever. The USSR was also trying to push communism. And one of the areas where the USSR saw that as like a fertile area, there was kind of 3 areas that they saw as being especially fertile area for them to do this. One was the university system, one was unions, trade unions, and one was Hollywood, the arts and entertainment. So like all 3 of those were areas that they heavily invested in. But what you also saw was, I mean, you had guys like Herbert Marcuse, who actually served with the OSS during World War II, but was also very influential within the Frankfurt School in critical theory. So, okay, why do I explain all this? Because you had these various entities that were dedicated to some form of Marxism, right? They thought Karl Marx did a good job of explaining the world. They don't think he was always right with respect to how communism was going to come about. In fact, they came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to come about in capitalist societies because capitalist societies did a good job for workers in comparison to communist societies or whatever else. But they did think that you would have to set up this counterculture. Well, one of the things that you saw within the civil rights movement and within the feminist movement is you saw all of these various groups which had legitimate grievances, right? They formed marginalized populations with either respect to law or social norms within a society. And they saw all of those as an opportunity to take all of these various groups, which were, again, legitimately marginalized in society. Sometimes it's a direct result of law, right? There's no arguing that Jim Crow deliberately targeted Black people, among others. And so they kind of globbed on to the civil rights movement, right? Which again, you know, the civil rights movement was fighting for things that were good and were noble. Again, a lot of it was that equal protection before the law and ending state-sponsored and state-encouraged discrimination against people based off of their skin color, which is morally abysmal.
Isn't it because it doesn't really sell very well on its own? It kind of needs to ride the undercurrent of the grievance?
Well, that was so the argument, again, what Gramsci and Marcuse and others had kind of identified was, if you're trying to sell communism as an economic system, it fails because it doesn't do as good a job. It doesn't deliver the goods. But if you're trying to sell it as a mechanism whereby marginalized people can realize, their proper place or elevation within society, and especially if you can launch onto grievances which are legitimate, but then you can perpetuate those grievances. You can create this never-ending cycle of additional new grievances.
Well, I mean, in these different waves of feminism, you had really legitimate grievances kind of driving each one of these, but then it would just carry out to a terrible outworking, because it started. You saw where it started, but in the 90s, even then, it was women in the workplace not wanting to be harassed, sexually harassed, and groped and things like that. That's what you were
publicly seeing.
That's what you saw publicly. But what I'm saying is there was always some kind of grievance for this ideology to get hold of and just kind of ride the wave.
To Nick's point, though, by the 90s, by the time you get third wave feminism, publicly, you see things like, well, not the 90s, but by certainly the 2000s, you see things like the Me Too movement. That's more fourth wave feminism, right? But yeah. But do you guys remember that episode that we did where I showed you a academic article that I actually cited in one of my master's papers that was written the year I was born in 1994, and the language in this article is radical feminist, cultural Marxist. It's talking about privilege and sex and gender, and it's intersectionality.
Yeah.
And so academically, what was being pushed at the time when the public wasn't aware of it, but it was certainly being taught within the university system, right?
That's where these ideas are born.
By the time the 90s and the 2000s roll around, the seeds are being sown for what becomes the public expression of said ideas by the time you get into the 2010s and now the 2020s.
Well, I think, so again, I think if you look at first wave feminism, right to vote, equality before the law, if you start to look at second wave feminism, that's where the legitimate grievance side is the idea that women want to be able to achieve economic independence. They want to be able to fully participate within the economy without having various restrictions on them, whether they be social or whether they be legal. But then the other side of that was this idea of, again, the sexual revolution, liberating oneself from marriage, because marriage is an institution which holds down and degrades women. And again, this is not me being hyperbolic. Go read Gloria Steinem. Go read what Simone.
She was extremely
totally anti-marriage.
She didn't have any. She never married and didn't have any kids, right?
I think Gloria Steinem actually. I think she did get married later. Well,
but she never had kids.
Well, again, I think the interesting part is it wasn't good enough that women had the option to do those things, right? Because if it was just, hey, you have the option, you don't need to get married to depend on it for your safety or for your financial well-being. And if you don't want to have kids, you don't have to. It started becoming something where they actively pushed for that as an approach within society and a greater fulfillment of your, feminine power if you didn't do those things, right? So it wasn't, hey, women should be free to be able to make the choice one way or the other. They were tipping the scales in a particular direction. And that's where you start to see, I believe that's where you start to see, neo-Marxism, critical theory, things like that, really glob on to feminism and start to take it over as something different, very, very different from first wave feminism or just the legitimate grievances which persisted. And that led you into third wave feminism. And when you get into third wave feminism, they kind of start that in the 1990s and beyond. And to Tina's point, there was this idea of that, okay, we can vote, we got equal protection before the law, we have access to, various, economic opportunities that we didn't have before.
But we're still getting catcalled, date raped, and groped at work. And so they were getting we're not all the way there yet, right?
Well, and that was the legitimate grievance, but again, how does the grievance perpetuate itself? And that's something that you always got to ask yourself whenever you're talking about leftist ideology, because as Lindsay likes to say, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And you actually see this with Marxist societies. When the Red Army wins, they stop. It's not like they stop becoming the People's Revolutionary Army. They're always the People's Revolutionary Army because there's always a revolution, because there's always some utopian class that they haven't made it to yet. And the reason why they haven't made it is because there's still counter-revolutionaries, which are undermining you and fighting behind the system and setting up, sexist or racist or whatever power structures. So the
cause can never die.
Yes. So what's the legitimate grievance? The legitimate grievance in the 90s is there's still there's still limitations or
still work to be done, right?
Yeah, there's always still work to be done, and it's always a good first step. But within the 90s, the legitimate grievance is that there are still areas where you could argue that okay, there's no legal sexism in place, right? Or it's been significantly diminished. So in the 90s, for instance, women still couldn't serve in combat arms or be fighter pilots or something like that. But that all started to kind of change in that era as well. So it was the idea that they're going to get rid of any last vestige of saying that, women couldn't participate in a particular field or attain political power or whatever else it was. But you also see more of the difference starting to emerge there on this kind of equity component, right? How do you know that sexism is still rampant? Well, because a woman hasn't done this yet, or a woman hasn't done that yet, or this glass ceiling hasn't been broken yet, or, for instance, the pay gap. This is a lie which persists.
The mythical pay gap.
This is a lie which persists. It's this idea that women make 75 cents on the dollar for every. It's like if that were true, then men would go out there, fire their male employees, and hire women. Because why wouldn't you? If you can save 25% on your labor costs, I mean that would be monumental. And the reason why it's false is because when you start to look at the data and when you start to compare apples to apples, you realize that the pay gap is probably more like 3 cents, which if you want to, the problem is you're not going to rally anyone to revolution over 3 cents. You need people to honestly believe that they're only making 25 cents or 75 cents on the dollar.
And even that 3 cents is explained by the types of jobs people go into. And
the 25 cents. The 25 cents is largely explained just by the type of jobs and the number of hours work.
But that smaller amount, I mean, you can chalk that up to women taking time off to have babies and various things like that.
Typically, which again though feeds into that whole second wave of feminism. Which
is why you should never be a mother.
It's the babies that are holding you back. It's the husband that's holding you back. If you didn't have those, that you throw off those chains, and then you get into fourth wave feminism.
I mean,
hold
on. I remember in the third wave feminism. That's when I was a kid, and I remember calling them feminazis back then. They were man-hating.
Yep.
They hated men, just thought they were knuckle draggers. That's also when...
Which is funny because now they're becoming men.
And they're welcoming women or men as women. Anyway, but no, that was when they started, the media and entertainment and everything started really portraying men as being these knuckle-dragging, comedic, dopey characters that, like, the men were just clowns, not anything like what a man should be. And so it painted this picture for people to kind of perpetuate that idea of hating men from a young age. Like even in cartoons and everything, the dad was always adult. And you had little girls and little boys growing up to feel like men were the inferior sex. They were stupid. They were knuckle draggers.
Men are depicted as Homer Simpson and women are depicted as Lisa Simpson, right? You know, Lisa's liberal, extremely intelligent, bright. Homer's an idiot, right? And
Bart's just a troublemaker.
And yeah,
because he's a boy.
And so like, there's no like, you know, this is actually part of the reason why I think that you're seeing now, because if you go back to these charts, what you see among all of these, and it's so funny because when you look at the discussion on the internet, especially like on X and stuff like that, you see so many people on the left that are like, oh man, men are becoming sociopaths. I'm sorry, are we looking at the same chart here?
Yeah.
Because last I checked, it's women that have flown off the rails in terms of becoming radically left-wing, whereas until 5 to 10 years ago, in almost all of these countries, men were getting more liberal as well. But now they're not. Now they're backtracking. Now they're becoming more conservative. But they're becoming more conservative at a much slower pace, with the exception of South Korea, than women are becoming more liberal. Look at the United States, for example. There's evidence that young men in the United States are becoming more conservative. We don't need to debate whether or not young women are becoming more liberal. That's just an objective fact. There is no debate to be had there. Everybody can see it with their own eyes and hear it with their own ears.
Yeah, but I think the men's number is about to start accelerating the same way it did.
I think we're going to turn it into South Korea. And I think the reason why is because think about like positive male role models that you could see within the media or entertainment. The current generation of young men, anybody my age or younger, we did not grow up with somebody like John Wayne. That was before us. That's the 70s and 60s. We just, unless we're watching classics, we're not seeing that in our formative years. We grow up with like Star Wars, and not even the original Star Wars, the prequels and the sequels.
Yeah.
Think about the Mary Sue that is Rey in the sequels. And think about how all the men are incompetent. Kylo, is the villain, and he loses every single duel with her. Yeah. Right? Like, there is no Darth Vader figure. He's a joke, right? He's an emo kid.
Every single movie has to have a female heroine who has no character arc and just bursts onto the scene being amazing right off the bat, showing all of these men how to do whatever.
And so there is no and I'm not saying that Kylo is the positive role model because he's the villain, right? But like Finn, for example, is also a loser. They write him out and they don't make him do anything. It's a waste of a character. I feel bad for the actor that played him because they destroyed his character before even creating it. Think about the characters that did exist that they killed off and ruined, like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. They destroyed them.
Let me say something about that, because there was, I'm not a huge pop culture guy. It's not like don't get me wrong, I enjoyed movies and, various like TV series and things like that growing up. But I always loved Star Wars when I was little, and I was a big Han Solo fan and the whole deal. But it's funny, I was never really a Luke Skywalker fan. I was always a Han Solo fan. But there was this, I watched this video once, and I'm not going to recommend the language, right? It was kind of rough, but Critical Drinker does this series on why modern movies suck. And what I thought was so fascinating is he did one specifically on them taking down heroes. And there's been a lot of critiques. Nerdrotic is another channel I love to watch on this, where there's a lot of critique on kind of the poorly written female, strong female lead. And it's like we're constantly having these characters forced on us, and people are saying, oh, well, if you don't like this character, it's because you're sexist. It's like, no, it's because they have no character arc. As Tina mentioned, they just show up on the scene and they're experts at doing everything and they're better at everybody else. And the only problem they ever had was just not truly believing in themselves. You can't relate to a character like that because that doesn't reflect real life. I don't care if you're a woman or a man.
Yeah, and the creators don't ever allow her to. The whole reason why we liked characters like Luke Skywalker, like Han Solo,
was because they were the sort of character, they were flawed.
You need the
They were flawed
montage, man. Come on.
They were flawed human beings that were trying to overcome, a villain like Darth Vader that just seemed larger than life. Not because he was a weak emo kid like Kylo Ren, but because this guy was just like the master Sith, right? Like he shows onto the scene and he's just kicking the crap out of everybody. And now you're looking at this little kid on Tatooine that's got to like grow up really quick in order to, fulfill kind of his role. And the same thing in Han Solo is kind of like the funny rogue, right? That only kind of cares about himself, but over time really matures. And what Critical Drinker was pointing out as his assessment was it wasn't good enough that they gave us a new character that was in line with, modern audiences, right? Or The Message, right? The Mary Sues. That wasn't good enough. They had to kill our old heroes first.
Yeah.
And I don't mean they just had to kill them, they had to die. I mean, they had to completely wipe away any sort of progress that they are made. So Han Solo starts off as, again, a kind of rogue smuggler all out for himself. And then what does he end? He ends as a failed husband and father and a deadbeat who, once again, he only cares about himself, but can't fly the Millennium Falcon better than Rey can.
Yeah.
Right.
And Skywalker's
and then
out there drinking blue milk out of the teat of some animal.
Yeah, and
He
like
becomes
throwing
a
away
hermit,
his
a
lifesaver
bitter
and blowing.
hermit.
Yeah, throwing all this stuff away. And it's like, and again, it was, and he was right in his assessment. He goes, the reason why we hate it so much is not because they just gave us new heroes that were poorly written. It's not that they killed off our own heroes. It's that they had to kill off everything we loved about them as well. It was almost like they were forcing this on us, saying, no, you will do this and you will like it. And when the moment anybody went on there and said, what are you doing? This is horrible. It's like, you're a bigot. You're a racist. You're a sexist. And it's like, you know what? I've about had it with that crap. Like, I'm done. We brought you legitimate grievances and asked you why you're doing this stuff. And your only response to our critiques of your crappy writing, or you killing off beloved characters that had been, relevant to generations. And by the way, cross-culturally. No, you had to throw all that out and force this on us. And again, when you look at that kind of third wave feminism and now fourth wave feminism, it just kind of comes full circle. Is that you will do what we like. And now, and this is the absurdity of fourth wave feminism, or
Now
what
it's
some
like
people call
deifying women.
Well, but again, it's not good enough to deify women. You also have to demonize men,
Right.
right? And then on now here's where the absurdity comes full circle. And now, if the only way to become a good man is if that man now transitions, and if that man transitions and says they're a woman, they're now the height of femininity. They go straight to the top of the feminist hierarchy now. I mean, how mind-bogglingly stupid is that?
Yeah, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. This is insane. Yeah. And it would be one thing if they just wrote some really great female characters who had a great character arc, and you could see them failing until they finally made it, and you have setbacks and things like that, and then they, overcome things. But in most of these films now, most of the writers never do that for women. They write the way that male characters were written before is, they had failings, and you watched them improve the failings and get to where they overcome something huge. With women, it's like they had no failings. They just blow on the scene and overcome whatever. They don't even show anything where they acquired skill. They never show where they had setbacks and had to overcome like their own failures in any sense, because I think it's blasphemy now to ever imply that women have failings whatsoever.
Well,
women,
the only
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but like women in films now, the minute they open their mouths and say anything, they are gonna be right. No matter what, like she is gonna tell the man what for. She's gonna be right, and she's gonna stick it to him. And
it's like the only failing a woman has in a modern movie is they just didn't believe in themselves enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Or
Just be
the
true to yourself.
patriarchy. Or it's
the
it's
patriarchy.
the dumb men didn't believe them until it was too late, and now they have to get them out of the situation. Like it. And by the way, the problem is not just confined to Hollywood. The reason that we're having this discussion right now about the destruction of male role models within entertainment and the elevation of Mary Sue's, literal Mary Sue's, and especially in the context of something like Star Wars, is because I think that is one of many causes. You talked about like the cultural Marxism element of this as well, and how it seeped into feminism, especially when you got into the second, third, and then especially the fourth wave, and the emergence of things like intersectionality and stuff like that. I remember you brought up before on this podcast, the writings of people like Kimberly Crenshaw and stuff like that. And so it's not just the entertainment stuff, and it's not just, cultural Marxism co-opted feminism. I think that it's a combination of many of these cultural factors that have led to women, just again, younger women zooming to the left. And for a long time, because younger people tend to be more liberal, more idealistic than older generations. That's kind of the whole point of growing up, is you want to rip the fence post out of the ground, and sometimes you pay a terrible price for it and you learn. Sometimes it works, right? It's not surprising that the overwhelming majority of like inventions and great novels and scientific discoveries and the things that propel humanity forward, the vast majority of them are undertaken by people that are like under the age of 40.
Yeah.
And in many cases under the age of 30, or certainly under the age of 35. And so
absolutely.
There's a positive element of that rebellious streak, or, urge to chart out new courses and discover new places and push the limits. And that has manifested itself in younger people identifying on the left or being more liberal than being more conservative. And so it made sense that men and women historically identified more on the left. But what you've seen over the last 10 years or so is that the left is no longer about just, pushing barriers. The left is about tearing down oppressive power structures. And when you paint men as the epitome of oppressive power structures, you should not be surprised when men check out and stop identifying as being on the left.
That's right. One of the things that I was gonna mention is that you can kind of start seeing this happening anyway. The left seems to be willing to sacrifice all of their financial stuff on the altar of wokeism. They're failing in so many ways. So many things are not doing as well. Entertainment is tanking like crazy. Disney is just,
and the media is collapsing as well.
They are doing so badly. And I feel like this backlash is actually tangible at this point. Watching the men go hard right is, I do believe it's about to accelerate. And one of the things that kind of showed that is, did you guys see the article from, I think Fox did it. It was Oppenheimer critic says movies award season success marks a troubling return to macho dad movies. But it's because people want a good freaking movie again. Yeah. And a lot of this stuff is just garbage. Everything. It's just, we get to the point where we're like, let's just turn it off. I can't even stand it.
Well, that's a good point too, because a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, right? The co-opting of the feminist movement, and then I look now and I see feminists, again, the same people, and J.K. Rowling is a perfect example of someone that identified as definitely a left-wing feminist.
Oh yeah, she's all about that abortion, but
but here's the interesting part, right? Like this is the part to really focus in on. But J.K. Rowling is a far left feminist who didn't give it, who drew the line at the transgender stuff, and all of a sudden a man saying I'm a woman and now they can dominate women's sports or dominate women's spaces.
And now she's hated and called a TERF.
Wait a second. Let me explain why that is, right? Like, she's hated, but why? Like, why would the feminist movement hate someone that in many respects should be the absolute pinnacle of like a feminist icon, and who was a feminist icon, like one of the richest people in the world, who like, again, writing books, self-made, the whole deal. Like there's a critique sometimes made that if you look at some of the richest women, it's the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, right? Or it's the ex-wife of Bill Gates. No, J.K. Rowling did it on her own, right? Like she, in incredibly difficult and trying circumstances, she did it on her own. And yet they have overthrown her and ostracized her like that. It took zero time for her own feminist movement to completely throw her overboard, call her a TERF, and say, we don't want anything to do with you. Okay, that probably more than any other thing I've seen within feminism, that should indicate what has gone on here with respect to the Marxist takeover, the critical theory takeover of the feminist movement and what was really going on. Because what it was really about was attaining political power. And because the feminist movement decided to tie itself almost exclusively with the left, with leftist ideology, so they didn't just adopt a message for women or empowerment for women, right? They adopted a leftist ideology. The way that we will do it is through the state. The way we will do it is through collective action. The way that we will do it is by, teaming up with other, quote, marginalized populations against the oppressors, right? So what happened? Well, the leftist movement said, here's the latest marginalized group that we're going to support, not just LGBTQ, but T, like the trans, because that represents because for a while that represented the pinnacle of intersectional politics. And for anybody wondering what intersectional politics is, it's essentially saying that there's multiple power structures and there's multiple ways that people intersect or interact with those power structures, right? So if you're a white in their term, I'm going to use their terminology, don't get mad at me. If you're white, cisgendered, heterosexual, male, you're at the top of the oppressive power structure, okay? And that oppressive power structure is bad to black men, but it's worse to black women, but it's worse to black trans people, right? You see what I'm saying? So if feminism has essentially been co-opted by leftist ideology, well then any woman that doesn't comply with every aspect of leftist ideology gets ostracized. They get punished. And the bottom line is that the trans community is higher on the intersectional power structure than women are. And J.K. Rowling learned that.
Yeah.
Now she's stuck to her guns because she's a billionaire, right? Or something like that. Like she can stick to her guns. What I wish J.K. Rowling would do, along with some others, is recognize that the things that you supported over here, right, are connected. And you didn't think they were. And the problem is that because you didn't actually, I'm sorry, but I believe this is absolutely true. Because you said, well, I'm willing to accept all these other things in order to get this thing. Well, now you've learned that you made a bargain where you're just going to be eaten last. And all of that kind of explains, why women now why young women especially are going hardcore left is because they've essentially they bought into an ideology which attempts to isolate them from their family, take away any sort of like instinct to be married or have kids. That's not just it's actually like frowned upon within modern feminism.
Mm-hmm. It's an illegitimate occupation for women.
Yeah, and their true empowerment is going to come from not even achieving their own professional goals. Their true empowerment is going to come from joining up with everybody else within the leftist movement in order to overcome these sexist, bigoted, racist, patriarchal power structures. So that explains why women have gone far more to the left. But now we need to also explain, okay, why have the men gone far to the right? And I think that explanation is far simpler. I think earlier on, when this was just a question of equal rights before the law or equal access within the economy, I think a lot of men looked at that and said, okay, yeah, I think this makes sense. Like I get why somebody would want those. I want those things. I get why somebody else would want those things. When it was, hey, listen, you shouldn't sexually harass women or force yourself on them. I think, again, men in general thought, yeah, of course not. Of course you shouldn't do those things. And of course we should also be, protective of that and realize that it can happen in situations like with work or whatnot where women feel intimidated by men because men are naturally stronger, although we're not supposed to say that. I think where the drastic cutoff started in, kind of a decade ago, and now we're starting to see it come to full fruition, is this idea that it wasn't good enough for men to say, okay, yeah, you got a point there. I don't know about this, but you got a point here. And so we'll concede that. It was, no. You will accept everything and you will accept you're the bad guy. And we're going to take you through a never ending string of struggle sessions.
There is never any redemption.
And the moment you concede to the demands of the struggle session, that will just instigate a new struggle session. It's like, oh yeah, that was a good first step. Step 2, which once you concede to the things in step 2, it will go back to being a good first step, and it starts all over again because they're not looking to find compromise or a common ground with you. Leftist ideology is looking to dominate. And so the moment that you project any sort of weakness, they don't look at that as, oh, okay, well, you've really come to grips with what we're talking about, and now we can plan a path forward.
Right.
That is not what is going on
That's why
here.
a lot of us on the right have gotten to the point where, nope, I will never apologize for anything I believe in. Even if I say something slightly wrong, I'm just doubling down at this point. I
This
will
is why
not
Trump became
ever
so
apologize to these people, because if you apologize, it just gets worse for you. And so don't apologize. Double down. Be uncancelable. And now that's becoming a thing.
Well,
Nick,
and I think men realize that young men were looking around, and whether it was in their classroom or whatnot, they were looking around, and they're the butt of every joke. They're the bad guy in everything. And they saw, I think they got to see on some level that there's no, Christian said it best once. He goes, leftist ideology is essentially a theory of original sin, but with no redemption.
Yeah, there's no way out.
And to the point where at some point you're going to get to that, and your response is not going to be like, well, is there anything I can, your response is going to be, this is unreasonable. And if it's completely unreasonable and I'm the butt of it, well, then it has to be defeated. It's not going to be compromised with. It's not going to be coexisted with. It has to be defeated. And young men, so I think there's two things going on here. One, younger men are starting to recognize the nature of the struggle that they're in, and they're tired of being the bad guy when they haven't done anything. They're too young to have done anything.
Yeah.
That was the first one. It's a sense of injustice.
Right.
But the other thing that is starting to be realized, and this is the part where we're going to move into this last thing where we talk about the consequence, or not the last thing, but next thing we're talking about the consequence. This is the part where young men are also realizing, oh, wait a second. Not only am I not willing to put up with your crap, and not only am I not willing to deal with this anymore, but you can't make us do it, because it turns out we're the demographic that you rely upon to police your streets and fight your wars and do the heavy construction work, and you rely on this for, oh, okay. Well, again, as we've said about the Supreme Court, like, you've made your decision, now let's see you enforce it. And I think younger men are waking up to the idea that the dirty little secret behind this, what looks like this massive, overwhelming woke agenda that just seems unbeatable, is it's a paper tiger.
That's true. I think I'd love to bring up another aspect of this under this category too, is for young women. I do think there's young women, there's older women. Right now, let me just bring up right now in the Western world, men die by suicide 3 to 4 times more often than women do. 3 to 4 times more than women, men will take their own life. I predict that we are going to see a shift in that demographic, and I think it's going to shift to women. I think that women, not necessarily, completely flip to women, but you're going to see a shift in that to women. And the reason why I think is because you've got aging feminists who the men that they want don't want them. Mm-hmm. And the men that do want them are garbage men. And so then you end up with these women that are like, well, I guess I'll be a lesbian then. And then they don't have kids and they don't have grandkids. And then they're older now. And what the heck do they have legacy-wise? Like, who loves them? And I feel like there is a point in your older age where you start to really appreciate the deep and meaningful relationships that you've built over long term with your spouse, with your kids, with your family. And by nature of this whole like radical feminist Marxist agenda that completely demonizes all of these, all tradition, all men, anything traditional whatsoever, having children is demonized. At that point, what that makes for is a woman that later in life has no one who loves her. Nobody. And what do you do? What do you do at that point? And I feel like you're going to start to see the suicide rate shift at that point, because and then at the same time, I feel like you're going to see young women who have seen through this and they want to go the more traditional route, and they do believe they believe that men and women really were made for each other, and that we can make each other better, and we can have these deep and meaningful relationships where our minds are so different, we balance each other out, and we're not good when we're far apart. We're good when we're closer together, and when we're sharing ideas with each other. And so there are women, I think, that are realizing, girls and women, that they want the more traditional type of relationships, and they want to be a more traditional type of woman. They want to have children. They want to do these things. They feel compelled to. And I feel like the options are going to be wide open for those women. They're going to be pulling down some really amazing men, because those really awesome traditional men don't want what the other women are given.
Tina, if you remember this chart that I showed you guys, where it was the percentage of people, this was South Korea, but it was the percentage of people who disagree with the statement that what women really want is a family and children.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost half of 18 to 29-year-old women disagree with that statement.
Yeah.
That women actually want a family and children. So that means that the other half that agree with that statement, well, they're going to have a lot less competition when it comes to finding a spouse, because the men do agree with that position.
What's funny is that even in that statement, it says, although they like to work too, like it even gives an out. It gives a caveat.
It's a very moderate statement.
Yeah.
But you know what's not moderate is this poll. And when I saw this, I was blown away. This is actually a pretty radical take. This goes into the whole consequence. So this question was, this was in the United States, this question. This question was the share of people who agree with the statement that, quote, women seek to gain power by getting control over men. It's broken down by age and sex. This is a very radical position to take. And it shows that it's still it's a very small number of people that agree with this statement. But what you see is with each generation, as they get younger, the men are more likely to agree the younger they are with this statement. So the person who created this thread said it's not just happening in Korea. Here's a striking one for the US. In contrast to the typical relationship between values and age, young American men hold more conservative views on gender than older men. And then he goes on to say this has huge social implications. And so what you see here is that the highest group of people who agree with this statement that women seek to gain power by getting control over men are 18 to 29-year-old men, more than any other group, broken down by age or gender.
Well, let me say this too. I think when we look at, because we're talking about what are the consequences of everything we've discussed up to this point, right? And it's the idea that there's the negative consequences is that when you have this drastic split, is that the women buy into this idea that it's not just about female empowerment, it's that female empowerment has to come at the expense of male empowerment. Right. And so men are the bad guys. They become the villains. Toxic masculinity. We've also kind of talked on how the leftist ideology has also hijacked feminism to basically make it a partner in every other objective within leftist ideology. And so the end result is the state becomes the person the girl is married to, right? Like it's like she hasn't gotten rid of a man; she's just replaced it with the government,
right?
Because now the government's going to be the one responsible for it. And this is why you see too, like go talk to a liberal women and ask them about what government programs they would like to see, and this idea that like I was sitting in committee and I saw a young woman get up there and she goes. Younger woman, I would say, like I would be shocked if she was in her 30s, right? She said, well, I have 2 kids and I had to spend $80,000 on childcare last year and I shouldn't have to do that just to be a professional woman. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, so then who should?
Yeah.
Right? Like if you don't have, because she was sitting there advocating for the Commonwealth of Virginia to provide additional funding for daycare service. Like, first of all, where the hell are you going? The daycare is $80,000. I think she said for 2 kids. And again, I'm not betraying anything. She said this in public testimony. You can go see it. But it was this idea of, no, I'm entitled to this and the government better provide it because I shouldn't have to pay for that. I shouldn't have to pay this much. And again, it's like, okay, then who should? So I should have to?
Yeah,
My
you
constituents
don't
should
have to pay. Yeah.
People that have never met you before should have to pay you? I mean, you're right. I don't think you should be paying that much because I think you should probably make different choices. But this is the idea is that she got up there and feeling perfectly empowered. And by the way, the bill we were talking about passed, right? Because all of the Democrats agreed with it and some of the Republicans did too. It was just this idea of, well, yeah, of course I'm entitled to this. And of course the state should have to pay for it. And that has been my experience with every single left of center person, period, but especially left of center women that I've spoken to. It's that, well, of course the government will take care of these things.
It's all women centered. It doesn't even take into consideration what is good for the child. Daycare is horrible for kids, horrible. You're raising kids with attachment disorders because of daycare. It's unprecedented. And daycare was supposed to be a last resort. And now it's a given. It's just what it's supposed to be. Oh, this is early childhood education. No, it's not. It's freaking daycare. And you're sending your kid into an institution to be amongst lots and lots of other kids and be totally ignored as an individual human being. What do you think that's doing to them?
Let me say this. I understand that certain people are in financial or economic considerations where they don't have family that can help. They have other situations. They have to work and they have to send their kids to daycare. I'm not trying to demonize someone for being in a situation where it has to do, but it is a little bit ridiculous when someone says I'm paying $80,000 on daycare. Like we're in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah, but right? The thing is here's what we always end up with. We get these people who they're like, oh, I'm in a bad situation, and so I have to do this thing. So we're all supposed to sit here and pretend that, oh, well, then we can't bring up anything bad about that thing because this person is forced to do it. No, we can agree that it's not ideal. It is not ideal. Yeah. And sometimes it's the only choice, but it is not ideal.
But Tina and Nick, for that matter, like I agree with Nick. I disagree with the economic argument that this person's making. But the thing is that this divide is not just limited to economics, because I can understand. I would vote no just like Nick did. I can understand the argument, for government subsidization of childcare, even though I don't agree with it. But it's not just limited to economic questions. Like here's another poll, for example, that remember when I read off the extreme poll where it showed younger men are having more conservative views on things like, sex and gender than any other group. Well, here's an example where there's another extreme, and this is a case where the left is now, especially younger left with women, are outing themselves as taking absolute insanity positions on something. This is a poll in Germany. It was the number of the number of people that disagreed with the statement that, quote, foreigners living in Germany should better adapt their lifestyle to that of Germans. Not exactly a very controversial take if you think about it. If you're going to move to a country, you should probably adapt the cultures and customs of the country rather than demanding that the country adapt itself to you.
When in
You're
Rome.
the one who's moving there. When in Rome, act like Romans, right? Well, apparently 18 to 29-year-old women heavily disagree with this statement and think that foreigners shouldn't have to adapt their lifestyle to that of Germans. And what you see with 18 to 29-year-old men is they're basically at the lowest level of any generation. And so that you have the highest gap between men and women on that question, where it's like a huge number of 18 to 29-year-old women apparently think that, no, I live in this country, but I have no reason to expect that somebody who moves here should ever adopt my country's culture or customs. And the 18 to 29-year-old men are like, are you nuts? Like, and so like, there's just example after example, and this isn't even economics, right? This is just a social issue or a cultural issue. There's example after example of just these two groups living in parallel universes almost. Mm-hmm. And Nick and Tina, for that matter.
The weird thing is that you see that in a lot of these European countries where there is a push to have certain designated Sharia law zones. And
that gets into the whole assimilation
problem. What's weird to me is exactly. And what's weird to me is women are the worst affected by things like Sharia law. Yet they are the ones that want to permit that. Just like women are the worst affected by the transgender stuff, but women are the ones that accept it. And so it's just, what is wrong with us, you guys?
No,
I'm so disappointed in my gender.
This is the part where I think we have to recognize that, once again, it's not that young women have bought into feminism. Young women have bought into leftism.
Yeah.
And leftism, modern leftism is not defined by feminist objectives or goals. That was one component. And quite frankly, in a lot of ways, the feminists have achieved what the first wave feminists want, what the second wave feminists largely, wanted. You would be hard pressed to find many of the grievances which existed, 10, 15, even 20 years ago or longer, that still exist either legally or socially. But there's a problem with this, is that, one, women have largely got what they wanted, but it's not actually making them happier. And then two, in order to get some of it, they teamed up with a side that was using them for their grievance, not using them for they didn't want to actually make it better to where it could be like, okay, now we can continue to live in the society that we live in, but we have more, legal, rights for women. That was not the end state or the objective of who they teamed up with in order to achieve that. And so now their concerns are significantly less valuable to the movement. In fact, the only time the left even acknowledges women as a thing anymore, other than just whoever defines as a woman, is whenever the abortion topic comes up.
Right.
And that's the important thing to understand. It's another one of the things that you can identify is that look at whatever issue is trending or whatever issue has some sort of political
whatever the current thing is.
Whatever the current thing is, whatever the current political thing is. The left will reach into its its group of marginalized groups or whatever and say, okay, you guys now are elevated for right now. But the moment it's not the thing anymore, you go back over here next. And if those two things are contradictory, it doesn't matter. In fact, it kind of works to their favor. But again, going back into that is where that's the direction young women are going. Young men are going the opposite direction. But the other thing that young men the other thing that is competing for young men's attention right now is you've got one side, which is more of like the Jordan Peterson side, which says that, okay, yeah, hey, in order for men yes, men should rebel against this, but the way they should rebel is by being honorable and responsible and intellectually formidable and, all those things. Or the John Lovell approach to it, like that's one thing. But then there's a lot of other messages from men out there which are far more black-pilled and goes into the realm of screw this, it's not worth it. Either they sink into gaming or porn or whatever it is to where it just dominates their life, and they essentially give up entirely on ever having a relationship because they just don't feel it's possible or it's just not worth their time because after all, the dopamine hits that they can get or the serotonin hits or whatever else they can now get electronically or they can try to get some other way. And it's artificial and it's not as good, but it's easy to access.
Yeah,
it's easy to get.
The AI girlfriends are going to bring about a fertility crisis around the world.
Right.
So
the women they do have access to that might be Instagram girls or social media girls that they see have them so turned off to women that they think all women are like that now and they just hate women.
The polling I think is enforcing that.
Yeah, the polling is suggesting to men as they look at this, they're like, well, okay, I'm not wrong, right?
Yes.
Like this is going in these directions. And that really leads us to kind of the final point here. And that is, okay, we see how bad it is. We can have a better understanding of why it's happening and why the responses are taking place the way they are. The question now is, what, if anything, can we actually do about this? Because we obviously don't want our young women to reject the idea of motherhood or being a wife. We also don't want them to give up on being able to pursue professional or economic ambitions, but we also want them to understand the very real trade-offs here. Because this is another thing that what the left does, and this is very, very clever of them, is they try to pretend like you can have it all.
Right.
So we've got a bill right now in the General Assembly dealing with surrogacy, where, I mean, you look at this and it's like they told a bunch of women, hey, you don't be a mother, don't be this, go be professional, you go girl, boss girl, whatever. And then all of a sudden they get into their mid 30s, or their early 40s and it's like, oh my gosh, I really want a child.
Yeah. And now they need to rent a younger womb.
Here's a young womb you can rent probably from, somebody that really needs the money, because if you look at the way they're setting this up, my gosh, it's the same political party that wants regulations on everything in the economy except for two things, abortion and surrogacy.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, they want it to be open up.
Surrogacy is about, and I've said this for probably a few years now, if you want to know what the real Handmaid's Tale is going to end up being, is women who end up having to sell their womb or have their womb used by people who genetically cannot have kids, where their parts don't work together or whatever it might be. And so basically it'll be the woke religion using the wombs of women that didn't destroy themselves on feminism and this ideology.
And right now they're setting up as a market, but I guarantee you what'll end up happening is they'll set up this market first, and then what will inevitably take place is wealthier, and it won't just be left-wing women, but wealthier left-wing women will be renting the wombs of poorer women. Mm-hmm. And then over time, it'll be like, well, that isn't fair.
Well, and
It
it's the
isn't
same way
fair-
that you
it
could like
isn't-
sell your kidneys.
it isn't fair that only the wealthy can afford this. Now we need government subsidization of surrogacy. And I guarantee you one day I'll have a woman going like, well, I dedicated my time to my career and surrogacy costs this much and I shouldn't have to pay that much in order to have a child.
Yeah, and at
again,
some point,
to which my question would be, okay, great, then who should? And the answer is the state, right? And that's fine. The left is very comfortable with the state answering that question. Now, funny enough, if the left were ever to completely win this thing, you would find out real quickly the state wouldn't be paying for half the things it's trying to pay for now because they can't deliver the goods. But the point is that the how do you combat that? And then on the same time, with the men going in the direction, how do you? And I will say this, I actually think the Jordan Petersons and the John Lovells are doing a very good job of providing men a pathway and using the frustration and the rebellion and saying, hey, this is a positive way to put it. And I'll even say this, and this will be controversial. Justin Waller, Andrew Tate, they say a lot of things that I completely disagree with. They've done a lot of things that I completely despise and find morally abhorrent. By the same token, I think the left wants us fighting each other. I don't want to say each other as if we're on the same team because I don't think we are. But, Tate is still saying certain things. I always say this. I said about 70% of what he says, I'm like, yeah, that's right on. And then the other 30%, I either vehemently disagree with or I just think it's contradictory and self-destructive.
that's on the masculine man side. So it's like they want all the men on the masculine man side fighting each other.
And so the idea is that what we can do, I honestly believe that the biggest thing that we can do about it, and as I've said this before and I'll say it again, is that one, if you are sending your child to a government-run institution for their education, then please, 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 for the love of God, stop being surprised when, oh my God, well, but I live in a small rural town and we have, I don't care. I don't care. You can go to Culpeper, Virginia right now, and you can walk right over to one of our local high schools, go into the library, and guess what you're going to find? You're going to find the same sorts of books that people have been talking about in Loudoun County and Fairfax County and these deep blue counties. Because again, if it's part of the government-run system, then don't be surprised when you get government morals and ideals. And so, like right off the bat, the first thing you can do to combat it is don't send your young, impressionable children into it. Because now listen, does that mean they can't come out okay on the other side? No, of course they can. But just understand that you're going to have to put in a lot more work against what's currently going on right now if they're getting exposed to that 6, 7, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Like, I don't think it should be controversial that I point out that this sort of thing is happening.
Yeah.
It's happening to varying degrees and varying levels of absurdity. I mean, obviously, if you are in a public elementary or if you're in a public high school in San Francisco, California, that's probably going to be significantly, worse ideologically than if you're in a public high school in rural South Carolina. But with respect to the ideological component here, but it is still going to be there. It is still going to be there. And if you don't recognize that, that's on you.
Your 3 hours a day with your kid is going to have a hard time combating the 9 hours a day that they're with the institution.
That's all well and good, but I want to black pill you guys first before but before we dive headfirst into the solutions, because believe it or not, I actually do think there are some solutions. But
we're already in the solutions phase here, Christian.
There's some big problems that I think, in that case, there's some big problems that I think need to be addressed. And the end of this thread that we were reading at the beginning of this podcast actually kind of hints at it. And the guy who says it, brings up that Korea is an extreme situation, but it serves as a warning to other countries of what can happen when young men and women part ways. Its society is riven in two. He's talking about South Korea, of course. Its society is riven in two. Its marriage rate has plummeted, and its birth rate has fallen precipitously to become the lowest in the world. And then he goes on to say, so where do we go from here? It's hard to say. One thing that could help is desegregating online spaces. If top influencers spoke to both sexes instead of just one, that could begin to bridge the divide. Will this happen? Almost certainly not. So there's a bit of the black pilling. And then he goes on to conclude, and I actually disagree with part of this, but he goes on to conclude, I think it's true that bridging the gap will have to come more from men than women. I'm going to stop right there. when women have flown off the rails and are endorsing things that will completely destroy society, like, I don't think people should assimilate into my country. I think the state needs to pay for everything. I'm going to hold positions that are radically to the left of any other group broken down by age or sex across the entire board. We've seen the polling here, right? I brought up earlier that, like, there's all these people on the internet, on Twitter, X. There's all these people on X that are like, man, what's wrong with men? I'm sorry, we're not looking at the same graphs here, because the graphs are showing women going into the stratosphere into leftism, and men are just now, with the exception of South Korea, just now moving towards the right. And in most of these countries, they're not even majority on the right yet. It's just projected that they will eventually become.
No, so men do not need to follow women off the cliff. That is definitely not the solution. I totally disagree with him, and I agree with you. Let me red pill you real quick.
Hang on, he's going to conclude with
I thought you said conclusion already.
It's the second part of the tweet. He says that, I think the solution needs to come from more from men than women. What I think they're hinting at is that just men need to become more liberal. That's going to fix the problem.
No.
But then he goes on to say, and I do agree with this part, he goes on to say, but I think diagnoses of toxic masculinity only exacerbate the problem, causing further negative polarization. Young men need better role models. This is to Nick's point. Young men need better role models, but it's not their fault they don't have them. And I have my own thoughts, but I'm going to save those for a second.
Okay, let me red pill you. Let me red pill you right back here, because you sat there and you said, their birth rates dropping to the lowest, blah, 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 and their marriage rates dropping to blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Guess who's still getting married? Guess who's still having babies? Guess who's not having babies? Okay, do the math, guys. All we got to do is wait them out. Get your kids out of their schools and wait them out.
So, actually, to that point, I had some of my own thoughts on this when I discovered this, the original charts and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, man, this is neat. It's interesting, because we were hinting at it before in some of our previous episodes. But, this is a lot more in depth than what we've seen before. And I kind of love your take on this, because I'm not as black-pilled on this as I originally was. And so, like, when I saw this, I ended up tweeting this myself, and I said, what's happening to young men? Well, they're done pretending simply for the sake of not offending people who hate them anyway. We have enough evidence at this point that indulging in people's delusions will never satisfy them. There is nothing to be gained by giving an inch to mentally ill narcissists who wield their victimhood status in order to claim the moral high ground against the rest of society. They're done pretending. They're done helping to perpetuate a lie. And they're done parroting pseudo-religious political BS. And perhaps most of all, they are done caring about the opinions of losers and lunatics. And then I quoted something that Jonam actually told me when I met him in the UK and we got a drink together. And Jonam told me it didn't start with him, but it was the first time that I think I'd heard it, and it came from him. And he told me, I don't care if I'm the villain in your story because you're a clown in mine. And so I tweeted the image of the chart that we've been talking about today, and then right next to this, which I think kind of actually really just illustrates what is happening right now. The blue line, which is, skyrocketing up, where it says, things are weird and I don't want to offend anyone. And then the red line is holding steady, and now it's finally dropping, and it's saying, I'm done pretending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what it is. Like, I mean, I know I've had that moment where there was a part of me that thought, okay, the way that I'm going to convince people is that if I can concede that there's certain points and maybe we can find, I'm done. I'm done with that, because it's just, now it doesn't mean it doesn't mean I'm done having civil conversations with people that are actually willing to have civil conversations and generally follow the rules associated with civil conversations, which is, I don't assume you have an evil intent. You don't assume I have evil intent. And then we're going to use logic, reason, rationality, facts, evidence, analysis. And then we're going to look at all that, plus we're going to add our experience and our perspective. If you're willing to do that, well, then I'm willing to have a conversation. And here's what I found is that people that are willing to do that, you can usually find some areas where you can work together, and then you can find other areas where you can just agree to leave each other alone. That's not the realm we're working in anymore. And we saw this, I've seen this several times already this session, where it's like, okay, we're arguing facts and logic. The facts aren't going in your direction. Oh, and you just called me a name. Right?
You're racist.
That's always it is. You present your facts, I present mine. You present your analysis, I present mine. You realize that your facts and analysis aren't actually getting what you want done. You call me a name. And then at that point, I'm like, screw you. Seriously, like I'm done arguing
Yeah,
with
and
you. You are not worth my time anymore, because what you've just demonstrated is this isn't about arriving at a particular conclusion. You have an objective, you have an end state, you want it. And me presenting facts and evidence for why it might be wrong is just a reason for you to disregard me. Now,
even when you have those good conversations, though, once the vote goes to happen, you'll see their name right up on the board opposing you again. It's just, I don't know.
Okay, the other side of this, though, the other consequence for men that are going more, young men that are going more conservative, is that I'm also starting to see more of them that are willing to say, I don't like. It's not that they're ideologically conservative or libertarian or Christian, or it's not that they have what it is they're pissed. They're mad at the other side, and that's what unifies them. And so it's not so much that when you say, oh, are you conservative? They say yes because they believe in free market economics and personal responsibility and self-determination. It's like, yeah, I'm that because I'm sure as hell not that.
Yeah.
And that's also problematic.
Yeah.
Because if someone is picking one direction simply because it's the opposite of the other, that leaves a lot of room for demagogues to come in and lead them into a different direction that is pretty horrible. And we've talked about that a lot on this podcast. Yeah. So when I say what are the things that we can actually do about it, the number one thing I'm telling you is, first of all, don't give your kids over to institutions or organizations, especially during their young formative years. Don't give them over to institutions which are going to turn them against you. There's this heartbreaking testimony of this girl who sits there at a school board meeting, and she talks about how, she has a good relationship with her family and how her father is always taking care of her and she's never wanted for anything. But thanks to her teachers, she now realizes what a horrible bigot he is. And again, why is he a horrible bigot? Well, because he voted for Trump and because he doesn't want trans kids to be able to share the bathroom. Like this is what you're dealing with. And the louder I shout it, the more I have some people that will come on and get upset with me for it. They'll try to come up with some sort of reason why it's not feasible without even really considering it. And I'm here to tell you, there are some people for which it may not be feasible to pull your kids out. That is true. There are other people for which they just don't want to do it. And listen, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, it wasn't this bad. But what I'm telling you is that it is absolutely this bad now, today, and you're going to have to contend with it. So just understand that if you choose to do that, I'm not telling you what, if you choose to do that, you are going to have to contend with the consequences and the mixed messaging that is going to be taking place as a result. So if you can, I would highly encourage you, don't give your kids over to organizations which are at this point by design going to challenge your faith, going to challenge your worldview. And I don't mean in an academic setting where we're challenging all these identities. That is not what is happening. It's you're bad, you're bigoted, you're mean, you're evil. And your opinion and your perspective and your evidence doesn't deserve to be considered because it's evil. That's it, the end. But this over here is acceptable. Here's the range of acceptable thought. And lo and behold, it's all left of center. Right? That is primarily what you're getting. Now, does that mean that every principal, every teacher, no, you can find lots of good ones. I know lots of good ones, but they're not the ones setting what the curriculum is. They're not the ones running the credentialing institutions within universities. They're not the ones, writing the textbooks. That's not happening there. And so they are having to contend with this at the same time that your child is having to contend with it. The difference is that they will get punished if they don't go along with the line, whereas they will get rewarded and elevated if they do. So you tell me what that incentive structure is designed to produce, both within teachers and students. You tell me. So that's number one. To the extent that you can, don't do that, right? To the extent that you can't, then you're going to need to work overtime to be able to combat it. And the way that you do that is not by saying, that's not how we raised you. The way you do it is actually by having those deep connections with your kids on a personal level first, right? Like when you take the time to play with your kids, when you take the time when they're little, when you take the time to, not only teach them, but actually spend that time building that relationship and that trust, right? And what that looks like develops over time. Well, then what happens is that even when they do find themselves in a situation where something is being challenged, because that's going to happen, right? They actually see you as someone to trust and come to about it, not as someone that's a potential enemy because my teacher told me, that authority figure you told me to listen to, well, they've now told me the things you're telling me are bad. So again, if you're actually spending that time building that relationship of trust with your child, they're going to be a lot less likely to just take the opinion from another authority figure as gospel. Because after all, they're an expert, right? They've got the credential. You sent me to them to learn, so I'm learning.
Right. And if your kids were learning from you, so here's the thing is I've heard a lot of people say, I can't teach my kids. They would never learn from me. And I always say that was taught. That was taught. That is not an automatic thing. That was taught because basically you have taught your kids that you go to this place and the people with all of the knowledge to impart will impart all of the knowledge. You're not the one who has all the knowledge. You are just the person they live with who clothes them and feeds them and puts a roof over their head. You're their family, not their teacher. And so you don't have all the knowledge to impart, which is why you send them somewhere else to get all the knowledge. So you now are not in a position of somebody that actually they look to learn from. And so that's one of the reasons why they won't, a lot of times I think the kids won't listen to what you have to say, partially because they have been taught that you're not where we get knowledge from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I was talking to someone
So even
the
if
other
your
day.
kids are in the schools, you need to still be teaching your kids every chance you get.
I was talking to someone the other day, and that statement came up. It's like, oh gosh, I don't know that they would learn from me. It's again, that's taught.
Yeah.
That's taught. That's because when your kids are first born, you are the one they're learning from.
Yeah. You taught them to go potty. You taught them how to eat.
When your kid's a toddler, they're watching you. When they watch you, when they watch mommy or daddy cook, when they watch you clean something, when they watch you work on something, and they want to help and they want to join in. And I realize sometimes it's frustrating, right? Sometimes you just got to put dinner on the table, or sometimes you really just need to fix the car or whatever it is. But if you can take some time and allow them to learn from you, not only does it build and really good emotional connections with your children, but it also once again reinforces that you are someone they should be learning from.
Yeah.
You're not just a meal ticket for them.
Right.
And it's amazing how I will watch people, sometimes within the public school system, certainly with their lobbyists, and with the left, where they act so arrogant toward parents, like, oh, where'd you get your teaching degree? Well, I'm sorry, you needed a teaching degree in order to teach your child things. I don't need a teaching degree to teach my child things, right? Because I have valuable experience and I have valuable knowledge. And oh, by the way, I'm probably doing something where I get paid for that valuable knowledge, and so please. But so that and the other part too that I would say, we forgot to get to that chart. Never mind.
I'm going to bring it up to you in a second.
Okay, good. The other thing too is like to Tina's point. Charlie Kirk got on and said this. He goes, look. He goes, we could solve this all in one generation. And the reason why we could solve it all in one generation is because the other side isn't having kids, right? Right now, they're desperately relying on immigration. The problem is, and they haven't woken up to this yet, a lot of the people that they're immigrating to the country, that they think they're going to be able to get dependent on government systems, show how wonderful they embrace them and how wonderful them to them, so they'll vote with them. Those same people that might say, okay, yeah, hey, I like the healthcare and I like that I can send my kids to school, but you're not transing my kid.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's why they want their kids in the school system.
Right. They're counting on the one more generation. That's all it takes.
They're counting on that. We're going to bring you over, and it's not because they like you, but they do like your kids. Mm-hmm. So if they can get your kids away from you and into the school system.
Now, what is it with the left and their obsession with people's kids?
Well, look. I think we've just answered it. It's if a major part of your narrative is you've told all the women as part of your movement that you shouldn't be having kids or getting married or whatnot. Well, that creates a real problem with respect to demographics because democracy works on votes. And so if you're not having kids, you're running out of votes unless you're finding new voters. Well, how do you do that? Well, we'll do it through immigration. Well, now what they're finding is a lot of the immigrants that are coming in don't go along, at least the first generation, are definitely not going along with their ideology. So what do they need? They need their kids.
They're a lot more socially conservative.
So if you're coming from a place where again, it was impoverished and your kids didn't have any education, and now all of a sudden you have a school that your kids can just go to, right? You don't even need to be in the country legally for that. Right? They can just go to it. Well, that sounds like a great deal because now you can work because you got to work hard, right? But then your kids are getting fed all this stuff at school. And that is why they're obsessed with it. They need it. They don't make enough of their own, so they need yours. That is the biggest that is the biggest flaw in their armor, is they need your children to be able to perpetuate this. And so that's why I keep putting this emphasis on don't give them to them, right?
So I mean, I something just kind of hit me that I think really explains like this just, I don't know, generational divide maybe between me and you guys, because like we're having this discussion about this, and like the first thing that you that Nick and Tina jumped to is, take your kids out of public school. That's all fine and good, but like, and I agree with all of that, but like that didn't
That's a long-term plan. That
didn't even dawn on me, because I'm not thinking about that, because I'm thinking more like, what do you tell the 23-year-old or 26-year-old guy that's not married and doesn't have kids and can't find any and from their point of view, there is no hope, because, and here's this chart that Nick was bringing up just a second ago. When you look at 18 to 29-year-old women, especially liberal women,
Liberal white women.
56% of them have a mental health condition, self-reported. And even with moderates and conservatives, it's way higher than it is with women than it is with men. And I mean, again, like there's just this generational divide, I feel like.
I think
between
it's funny that these women are admitting they're crazy.
There's this big generational divide between Nick and Tina and myself and Hamilton, for that matter, because like we have this discussion, and then the first piece of advice that Nick and Tina give is take your kids out of public school. The first piece of advice I'm thinking is like run away from 18 to 29-year-old women.
Okay, well, but can I also say something, Christian? Maybe the reason why we say that is because our 21-year-old daughter's about to get married.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe it's because we're not just crazy and completely out of touch, but there really is something.
Crazy.
No, but there really is something to what we're saying. And I know it's easy to dismiss if you don't feel like you're going to be able to get married anytime soon. But for the people that are out there that are married, right, and that have kids this age, yes, first things first, pull your kids out of the environment which is causing these problems.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
It's not that I don't have. It's not that we don't have anything to say to the people that find themselves in their 20s who
are living
feel like they're
through
never going to
this
find
divide.
somebody.
That's my whole point.
Well,
that like the first
problem
thing
is you're going to have to. Here's my advice: white knuckle it, buddy, because we didn't get here overnight. And we're not going to get out of it overnight. And that's why we're saying the long-term goal is that we get out of this, right? We're not getting out of it overnight. The only way to get out of it is to get our kids out of it so that they're no longer getting indoctrinated by this bull crap
and I totally
that they're
agree.
shoving down their throat. So people like in that generation, I'm sorry, your parents screwed you. Your grandparents screwed you. And I don't know what to tell you. You're going to have to white knuckle it and try to suck it up. Because you're going to have you got to find.
But Tina, now we're black pilling those same people that.
Okay, Christian, can I just say something here? This is a part that does. We go back and forth on this all the time. And if for anybody that has not heard me say this before, I'm telling young men right now, I can't say I get it in the terms that I've experienced it, because I haven't. But I can imagine how much it sucks to feel like you have done all the right things, and yet you're looking at your pool of women, you're looking at these graphs, and you're thinking, I'm doomed, right? Because the math don't math. And to Tina's point, you're right. You have every right to be upset about it because you didn't create the social or economic conditions for this to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, but by the same token, the dudes that freaking stormed the beaches in Normandy didn't create the conditions that led them to have to storm the beaches at Normandy.
Right.
Okay?
But they had to
so
do
I'm
it.
sorry it sucks.
And there's no magic
Okay, but by
pill.
the same token, let me tell you what's not going to fix it. What's not going to fix it is sitting around and talking about how unjust and how much it sucks. That will never fix it.
Okay.
So I can only sympathize so much with the idea of this sucks and it shouldn't have. I'm not done. I can only sympathize so much with this sucks and it shouldn't have happened. I acknowledge that. I agree with you on it. But if you want to know what's going to fix it, there is no magic pill without good men being the ones to fix it. And one of the ways that you fix that is, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. All right, you can't necessarily affect what another person is going to do with their life. You can't affect what a woman is going to do with her life if you're a man. Right. But what you can do is you can make yourself formidable. You can put yourself out there, because as we've already mentioned, we've had people flooding our comments section on our community chat, women saying, "Oh my gosh, I am a woman that wants a traditional man. I just want to know where to meet it. Where do I go?" And we've even said these are the places
Yeah.
that you should start. Not
We
gotta
just did a
find each other.
podcast on this.
Yeah, you got to
yes,
find
I
each
know,
other.
but that's my point. Is that let's be again. I'm not telling men suck it up because it doesn't suck or because this is unfair. I'm just telling them that what really sucks about this is that at least for the guys that were storming Normandy, they were doing it because they had a girl back home. Right? They were doing it because they had the prospect of, I'm fighting for my country, but I'm also fighting because what my country represents is going home and finding her and having kids and building a family. And I understand that guys right now are feeling like, yeah, I'd love a Normandy to storm if it meant that at the end what I got was this. But I'm not seeing that. Like, I understand the frustration with that. What I'm trying to say back, though, is that the bad news is no one is going to save you. The good news is you can save this situation. Because here's the one thing that is absolutely true about families. Here's the thing that's true about societies. Here's the thing true about relationships. Okay. The better men are, and the more they fight for what they believe, the more likely are you to create the sort of societal conditions that they actually want. And that's a fact. And I think one of the things that is positive about how men are starting to respond to this crap, because if you go back and you look at that chart, there was a part where men were more liberal than women. Why was that? Well, I think part of it probably had something to do with the fact that they like the idea of women adopting promiscuity. They like the idea of hookup culture. That seemed to work for them. Unfortunately, it ended up helping contribute to an attitude both towards men, towards marriage, and toward traditional gender roles that now all of a sudden they're looking back going, oh, this sucks. It's one of the reasons why I get so pissed off when I hear Justin Waller or Andrew Tate, who will one minute say something I agree with, and the next minute say, oh yeah, but men were designed to sleep around like this. Oh, so let me get this straight. You don't want a woman who sleeps around, but you want to be the sort of guy that creates women who sleep around. Because again, the math don't math.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that, look, the more men that are diligently going out there, because here's the other part, it has gotten more competitive between men. Because there is a pool. When we look at all these graphs and we say, oh my gosh, there's a 50% differential and women are 30% more liberal. Okay, well, that means that there's still other women out there that you can go. There's still other women out there that don't buy into this, that don't want it. And they're not showing up to the club. So if you're looking at the club, they're not there. And guess what? They're not in your room. If they were in your room, you wouldn't have a problem. So you're going to have to leave your room. And you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to be bold. And you're going to get shot down from time to time. And it's going to suck.
Take a hand. I can take a hand. Nick, I have got to get a word in, though, because I really need to clarify. You mentioned something a minute ago about, victimizing or basically complaining about the circumstances. Everything that I was saying about this generational divide and how you guys immediately pivot to you need to do this with your kids and how I don't even think about that was not me trying to say, woe is me. The reason I brought that up is because what I'm trying to say is we've done this whole entire podcast about the ideological gap growing between 18 and 29-year-olds and how that is leading to a South Korea situation where nobody is talking to the other sex, nobody's getting married, and nobody's having any kids. And so of course, and I don't disagree, of course, the long-term solution is for the parents that are raising kids that aren't yet 18 to 29 years old, we need to stop this from happening before it happens. So that way Gen Alpha, not the Zoomers, right? The generation that comes after don't have to live through this. Of course, that's the solution. Yes, take your kids out of public school, homeschool them, private school them. Don't allow the left to ideologically capture them before they enter into those formative years of 18 to 29. I totally agree with that. The reason I brought this up was not for me to just whine and moan about how, terrible of a deck of cards I got dealt. The reason I was bringing this up was because I wanted your guys' take on what do you tell the 18 to 29-year-old man and what do you tell the 18 to 29-year-old woman? Because the thing that you tell those two people are probably different. If you're listening to our podcast, you're probably on the right, although I do know that there are some people that listen to us that are on the center left, but might not be far left. They might be liberals in the classical sense. But if you're listening to our podcast and you're somebody like Grant, right, who's in that age bracket, like, or you're Andrea, who's in our circle group, who's in that age bracket. These are people that are in that 18 to 29-year-old age bracket, and they're men and women, and they're having to deal with the same problem just like I'm having to deal with it. And so it's not woe is me for being a man any more than it would be Andrea saying woe is her for being a woman. That's not the point. The point is what type of advice, what type of actions do we need to tell the Zoomers and Zillennials out there that are living through this right now, living through this ideological hellhole that is emerging, where a huge chunk of the population is flying off the rails and another chunk of the population is just now starting to get their heads squared on properly and realize that we're in a social crisis right now. Because if you think about it, one of the bigger problems is also, okay, great. With men, it's now maybe, idealistically, 60-40 conservative liberal. It's actually more close to 50-50, but it's moving more conservative. For women in that same age bracket, it's like 70-30 liberal conservative. So what you have is like half of men courting only 30% of women. Like that's where the math falls apart.
Let me tell you how some of this polling, though, you got to keep in mind, women will have a knee-jerk reaction to call themselves a liberal, even if they don't really align with it sometimes, because it's socially unacceptable not to be a liberal. And women are a lot more concerned with what's socially acceptable than men. So I would imagine that number is maybe a little softer than that, but also it's the same thing we were going to say before is go where your common people are.
Wait a second. I want to first acknowledge that that's a good point. Like when you were saying, like, look, I'm not saying, yeah, of course, I agree with all your points about kids, but what do you say to the people that are not in that situation? They're not, that's what they want to get to, the point where they're having kids. That's a fair point. That totally fair. I will say that, again, when we talk about to the 18 and 29-year-old man in this group that is very discouraged by this, again, I don't know what to tell you as far as the pool of people that you're going to be able to, compete for. Because obviously that's a smaller pool if these numbers are accurate. But what it does mean, I believe it should drive you to do is that, okay, I'm in a more competitive market right now, which means I do need to focus on all those areas which make me more competitive, right? And that's, again, am I intellectually strong? Am I physically strong, right? Am I professionally strong? Can I protect? Can I provide? Can I provide the things that the sort of woman that I want is looking for in a marriage? And if the answer is no on those, or no on some of those, maybe you're good on the, physical strength and the intellectual, but hey, you really need to develop some more professional skills so that you can be a good provider. Okay, well then that's what your focus is, right? So that's the first things first. You line up those areas, and we've talked about this before. We talked about the spiritual, the intellectual, the professional, the physical, and the emotional. Right? Those are all categories for which none of us are perfect and all of us can improve. And so you're looking at what is my picture? If you're a man asking this question, what is my picture of the sort of woman that I want to attract to be my wife? Okay, I need to develop in these 5 areas. And so I'm going to focus on developing those 5 areas. On top of developing in those 5 areas, I'm also going to put myself into the situations which I think are far more probable for me to actually have contact with the sort of woman I want to marry. Right? That is a simple logical equation. I develop in these areas, and I go into the areas where I can actually find the sort of person that I'm looking for. And to Tina's point, when we've discussed this before, that is all rooted in, am I going into areas where values are going to be shared? Because that's the number one consideration. If you're going to the club, what you're looking for is something cheap. What you're looking for is a hookup. And so if you're going there, that is a total waste of your time. In fact, it's worse than a waste of your time. It's diminishing returns. So if I'm going to the places where I'm likely to find the sort of woman I'm looking for, what that also does is it also helps me know where are the areas that I need to improve to be more competitive in that area, right? So if you just look at it that way, you break it down logically, the answer presents itself. Now, the good news is, because there's going to be frustration going into that environment, especially if you have to develop more in those 5 areas that we've talked about. But if you're doing both simultaneously, you're getting better feedback on where you need to develop. And the development, the nice thing about this, right? If you're going to the club or you're going to areas where you're not likely to meet someone that you like, it's like I said, not only a waste of time, it's diminishing returns because you're not getting the right feedback. But if you are actually developing the ways that you know you need to develop, because it's not hard. Like if I want to be more intellectually formidable, then I need to be able to study the things, especially the things of my interest or whatnot. If I need to be more professionally thing, then I can look at anything from managing money better to investing to whatever skill sets that I need to be, competitive in those particular environments. If it's on the emotional side or just the communication side, well, then actually engaging in situations where you can have meaningful discussions with people and learn how to effectively like listen and respond. Like these are all things that you can develop, and you will always be better for developing them, right? It is never a waste of time. So you do that, and then you go into the environments. For women, it's the same model, right? It is the same model. It's going to represent itself differently, right? Because whereas a woman probably wants a guy to be, physically strong and do the whole thing, men are not as concerned whether or not their girl can beat somebody up,
Yeah.
right? But they do appreciate if their girl like works out and is physically fit. Okay, great. So there you go. What else does a man appreciate about a woman with respect to emotion? Well, they generally appreciate again, men generally operate in environments where we don't get a lot of positive feedback for the stuff that we do well. But if our girlfriend or our wife or whatever is encouraging to us and is proud of us, oh my gosh, that is just something that we eat up. We love it. We really appreciate it. What about it when it comes to the intellectual? Having someone that we can actually have a conversation with and that we can go back and forth and test things and work through ideas. Like this is all stuff that we enjoy. These are all things that you can develop.
Yeah.
And then at the end, again, you go to the locations where you're most likely to find the sort of men that you want to that you would want to marry. And you prioritize the locations based off of values first. Values and interests. And everything else because again, if you go to the club, you might find someone gorgeous. You might find someone that you really think is hot. But if they don't share values and they don't share interests, other than pretty things, right? Then there's no value there. There's no long-term value there. And so that's what I would say. That's the advice that I would give.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I think that also one aspect that I didn't mention before, but is pretty relevant is there is this trend going around of these women who were like, oh, I, started dating this guy and it's the first time I really wanted to make him a nice meal and I want to do this and I want to do that. And I felt the feminism leaving my body. And that's kind of a trend where it's like, wow, when you're suddenly treated well, usually by a conservative man, since leftist men do not treat women well. I tend to think one of the reasons leftist women hate men so much is because they're always around leftist men. But if you lean into your masculinity, and I don't mean in some like knuckle dragging Hollywood masculinity sense. I'm talking about like all of the good things that masculinity brings out in men, whether it's leadership, whether it's just pure like strength, being strong, being mentally strong, being capable of leading, being capable of being decisive and making really good decisions and being able to express yourself well. And there are so many things, if you lean into your masculinity, that draws feminine women. Feminine women want a masculine man, and that's how you will sort of become the magnet for that. And I would say the same thing for women. Lean into your femininity, let yourself be feminine. And everything that means and sort of build the same kind of qualities that men would be building on the masculine side. You build yours on the feminine side and lean into it. Listen to your biology a little bit. And, I think there is a point where, men diving off this deep end here on this chart, going crazy. The worst case scenario is men go with women right off the dang cliff. No, men need to lead. And so I think the more far right they go, it will end up drawing the women. Because there's a fair chunk of women who cannot remain where they are if they see something their biology really wants. And so they're going to have to, and I've watched it, man. I have seen liberal women go to the gun range and watch their man ish go and start shooting bullets down the range, hitting the targets, and you should see the look in her eye. I'm like, do you guys need a room? Because I am telling you, I have watched women flip just like that.
Nick has too. One of the links that he sent around for this podcast was about how, progressive women want to date men who act like conservatives.
Yeah.
And he even sent me a Google search link, which is, I'm a liberal girl. Why do I want a more traditional man? Google that. You will be stunned at how many times this question has been like we're not going to click on any of them particularly, but
and that's
like,
why I'm saying there's hope, because these women, they can be drawn out of that. I am telling you, they can be drawn out of it.
There's something to be said. A lot of the discussion around that Twitter thread when it came out was, on the left, it was, how do we get the men to become more liberal? And on the right, it was simply hold the line, keep moving to the right, and eventually the women are going to realize where the power is and the direction is, and they're going to be attracted to that because they are.
Yeah.
And the reason that women are flying off, younger women, right? Because your grandma's still probably based. But like the reason that you're I know my grandmother was, God bless her, I lost her last month. But the reason that younger women are becoming more liberal is because, quite frankly, that's where the power and status and influence is. We've done whole podcasts on that, right? The whole concept of the cathedral and the Leviathan, and think of all the institutions, the culturally shaping ones that the left has captured. They've captured them all. They have absolute cultural dominance in this country, and they brag about it. But you know what? That cultural dominance is starting to flake a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? We've talked about the decline of Hollywood. We've talked about the decline of the media. We already know that there's flagging confidence when it comes to like the tech sector, the financial sector, government. Like, eventually what's going to happen is these institutions that the left has captured are going to start to crumble.
Yep.
And what will replace it, if we play our cards right, will be conservative-oriented replacements of those institutions. And when that happens, the switch is going to happen, because a lot of these younger women are going to realize that's where the power and wealth and status is. It's with conservatism. It's with the right. And so the worst case thing that we could do is do like the Nikki Haley approach and just try to put a conservative label on top of feminism or leftism or intersectionality and just, we just need to make the men more progressive here, there. No.
Or feminize
Hold
the men,
line.
yeah.
And the piece of advice that I can give to a young woman who's a conservative that's listening to us, and I know that there are some, even though they're a minority, especially on YouTube, because we've gotten questions from them in our circle group about this type of stuff. You are under probably more pressure than I am under, because I'm the bad guy. But you're supposed to be the victim that the left appeals to, and you're rejecting that victimhood status by being on the right. Not only that, you're facing even more pressure than I am because you're outnumbered. At least in my age group, you can argue that we're now a majority conservative or close to it. You're not even close. It's 70-30 or 80-20. The odds are stacked against you. And also, there's one more thing, which is that women tend to, it's a generalization, but women tend to be more agreeable. And so there's an even greater pressure to conform with the idea that I just need to call myself a liberal and identify with the left. Everything is arrayed against you if you're a young female conservative. And the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is, I don't know your life story, but I do know that if we share similar values, the number one thing that you can do to push back is to hold the line and not cave. Because every incentive is there for you to cave and you to just be agreeable and go with what the left is saying, go with what the institutions are telling you you have to believe.
Yeah, but that's
you
what got
know
us
that
here.
they're wrong.
Yep.
You know that they're false. And do the right thing and hold the line. And I promise you, if you hold the line, eventually other people will come alongside you and you won't feel lonely anymore. There'll be other women that will come alongside you. There'll be men that will come alongside you. We are seeing a shift take place right now. And it's not going to continue unless the tiny minority that we have of young conservative women realize that they're actually playing a crucial role here. And it sucks, just like it sucks to be a young man who's a conservative as well, who's going through this. But I know that it's got to suck arguably even more. And so, like I said, my biggest advice to you is hold the line and don't cave. Don't give them an inch.
Well, let me I mean, gosh, we're almost at
we
2.5
gotta wrap it
hours
up.
now. But Christian, that was great. I totally agree with that. And I do, that's the last part I kind of want to end on, is this idea of encouragement, is that a lot of people are like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? They control so much. Look, like I said, they're one generation away from losing, because they don't have enough kids to this is why they need your kids. They're trying to, again, they're trying to, rely on immigration, but a lot of the immigrants come in, don't want what they're selling. And so they try to get the immigrants' kids, right? Like this is the plan. This is the whole plan. And so the response to that is, okay, well, no, what am I going to do? I'm going to work hard. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to find someone. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have kids. and I'm going to raise them, right? Like not somebody else. I'm going to raise them. And the good part about this is that if we can just remember that at the end of the day, what they have is not sustainable. They cannot sustain it. They actually need the very people that they have alienated, right? They need women that not just want to be professionals, but also want to be wives and mothers. They need, right, young men. They need young men to be able to fight wars, enforce laws, build things. Like they need us. That is the, like, this is the part that should be encouraging to everyone. They can't win. They can't. And so if you do hold the line, and if you do push forward, and you don't ask permission for it, right? And you don't apologize for it, and you're confident in your decision. So there's some times where you might want to engage intellectually with someone, and if they're willing to have a good conversation, great, do it. But also let what you do in your life be the best argument for what you believe. And if someone has decided that they're going to engage in the sort of tactics that you see now, where the moment you get into a conversation, it doesn't go in their direction, they start, engaging in an ad hominem attack and just personal insults, ignore them, walk away. There's no need to convince that person. There's no need to waste a single moment on that person anymore because you got stuff to do. You got things to do. You got ways that you're becoming better. You got ways that you're either building your family or looking to start one. And you don't need to waste your time dealing with somebody that has already demonstrated they're not willing to be intellectually honest with you. See, they want you to be so concerned about getting in an argument with them that you're not focusing on the things that are actually going to make you better. And by extension, your family better and your community better and your country better, right? So the more you're focused on those things instead of the petty, social media argumentation and things like that, the better off you are going to be. Because they need, again, the left needs them to be miserable and aggrieved and fighting and activists and the whole deal, alone and miserable, right? With their whole idea to completely, succumb by a particular group or organization, right? That's not where you get your identity. And so that should be very encouraging. Because I don't want people, yes, there are times where you should definitely develop yourself intellectually so that when the opportunity comes to actually have a good faith conversation with somebody that wants to have it in good faith, you can do that. It's important to develop yourself intellectually from when you're educating your own kids and they're asking you questions and you feel confident in your ability to respond or to at least research with them and get the answer. But stop wasting your time with people that have made it painfully obvious then they're not willing to have a good faith conversation because ultimately they're going to fail. And we don't wish that for them. But if they're not willing to be convinced by reason, they're probably going to be convinced by consequences. And consequences are an incredibly powerful teacher. And one of the things that happens when people have to deal with consequences that they don't like and they finally make the connection between their decisions and their consequences is they start looking around for who's got it figured out. And if you're the person that's willing to do that and you're willing to help them at the moment where they're actually willing to receive that help, well, then all of a sudden, that's a powerful testimony, right, for what you believe. So that's what I would say. Develop on those, look, whoever you are, wherever stage you're at, because it doesn't stop even after you get married and have kids. If anything, you definitely have to continue it then. But develop yourself spiritually, emotionally, physically, professionally, intellectually. Right? Put yourself into those areas where you're most likely to find people that, you would actually, the pool of people that you could actually find someone that would be a good wife, that would be good for a husband, for what you want to achieve, for your objectives. And then teaming up with that person. And now you have your objectives together as a family. Focus on doing those things. Because again, if enough of us focus on doing those things unapologetically, right? This is like a one generation win. This is a one-generation battle. But if we continue to get tied down and mired in the sort of fight they want to have, which is fighting over institutions which have either been completely co-opted or are now just actively working against us, or utterly depressed at the current state of affairs to where we just get up and we either, diminish into nothing more than, online entertainment and those cheap dopamine hits or serotonin hits or whatever else, right? Those two options they are willing to accept, but they hate the option where you fight to make yourself better, marry someone that is also fighting to do the same thing, raise kids, educate them, and find communities which you can actually grow together, right? And the best news is that not only is that the most effective strategy for what we find right now, it's also the most fun. It just is. it's the most fun, it's the most fulfilling. So put your focus there. The graphs give you an idea of your operational environment. We're not going to ignore the operational environment, but we're also going to do the things that we know need to be done so that long-term we can actually change it back. And everyone ends up being better off as a result. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate all the support. Our last several episodes have been some of the most watched that we've had in the history of the podcast. We can't thank you enough as the audience. If you do get something out of this, consider subscribing or liking. I know I go onto a lot of pages and I'll just watch the thing and I'll totally forget about liking or subscribing. But if you do, it has a huge impact. Not to mention the fact that, you know, when people are commenting and liking, it also gives us feedback on the sort of topics that you would like to see us discuss more. Also, consider joining our community chat. We're well over 1,000 people on there now, and we get some excellent advice and great conversations going on there as well. And not to mention the fact, I don't want to get too far ahead, but we got some announcements that are going to be coming up probably in March about some of the other things that we're looking to do with that community to again, provide the sort of environment where people can come in and find people of like mind, work together to both, you know, improve, you know, yourself, your marriage, your family life. And we're all about that. And we can't tell you how much we appreciate it and how much we've really enjoyed it. So once again, thank you very much. And thank you to Good Ranchers for sponsoring us. Again, go check out goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick. You know, January, that deal's over in January. So go there, get a bunch of free chicken with your subscription. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.